Chapter 41. The High Places. The Broken Mountains, breathed Brother Longfoot, his voice hushed with awe. Truly, a magnificent sight. I think I'd like it better if I didn't have to climb, grunted Logan. Jezzel by no means disagreed. The character of the land they rode through had been changing day by day, from softly sloping grassland to gently rolling plains, to buckled hills spattered with bare rocks and sullen groups of stunted trees. Always in the distance had been the dim gray rumors of the mountain peaks, growing larger and more distinct with each morning, until they seemed to pierce the brooding clouds themselves. Now they sat in their very shadow. The long valley they had been following with its waving trees and winding stream ended at a maze of broken walls. Beyond it lay a steep rise into the rugged foothills. Beyond them the first true outlier of the mountains rose, a stark outline of jagged rock, proud and magnificent, smeared at the distant top with white snow. A child's vertiginous notion of what a mountain should be. Bayaz swept the ruined foundations with his hard green eyes. There was a strong fortress here. It marked the western limits of the empire, before pioneers crossed the pass and settled the valleys on the far side. The place was nothing more now than a home for stinging weeds and scratching brambles. The Magus clambered from the cart and squatted down, stretching out his back and working his legs, grimacing all the while. He still looked old and ill, but a great deal of both flesh and color had returned to his face since they left Alcus behind. Here ends my rest, he sighed. This cart has served us well, and the beasts too, but the pass will be too steep for horses. Jezzel saw the track now, switching back and forth as it climbed, a faint line through the piles of wild grass and steep rock, lost over a ridge high above. It looks a long way, Bayaz snorted. But the first ascent of many we will make today, and there will be many more beyond them. We will be a week at least in the mountains, my boy, if all goes well. Jezzel hardly dared ask what might happen if things went badly. We must travel light. We have a long, steep road to follow. Water and all of the food we have left. Warm clothes, for it will be bitter cold among the peaks. The birth of spring is perhaps not the best time to cross a mountain range, observed Longfoot under his breath. Bayaz looked sharply sideways. Some would say the best time to cross an obstacle is when one finds oneself on the wrong side of it. Or do you suggest we wait for summer? The navigator chose, wisely in Jezzel's opinion, not to reply. The pass is well sheltered in the main. The weather should be far from our most pressing worry. We will need ropes, though. The road was good in the old time, if narrow, but that was long ago. It might have been washed away in places or tumbled into deep valleys, who knows? We may have some tough climbing ahead of us. I can hardly wait, muttered Jezzel. Then there is this. The Magus pulled one of the nearly empty fodder sacks open, pushed the hay out of the way with his bony hands. The box they had taken from the house of the maker lay in its bottom, a block of darkness among the pale, dry grass. And who gets the joy of carrying that bastard? Logan looked up from under his brows. How about we draw lots? No? No one said anything. The Northman grunted as he hooked his hands under it and dragged it off the cart towards him, its edge squealing against the wood. Reckon it's me, then, he said, thick veins standing out from his neck as he hauled the weighty thing onto a blanket. Jezzel did not at all enjoy looking at it. It reminded him too much of the suffocating hallways of the Maker's house, of Bayaz, dark stories about magic and demons and the other side, of the fact that there was a purpose to this journey that he did not understand, but definitely did not like the sound of. He was glad when Logan finally had it wrapped up in blankets and stowed in a pack, out of sight at least, if not entirely out of mind. They all had plenty to carry. Jezzel took his steels, of course, sheathed at his belt. The clothes he wore, the least stained, torn and reeking he possessed, his ripped and battered one-armed coat over the top. He had a spare shirt in his pack, a coil of rope above it, and half their stock of food on top of that. He almost wished they were heavier. They were down to their last box of biscuits, half a sack of oatmeal and a packet of salted fish that disgusted everyone except Quai. He rolled up a pair of blankets and belted them to the top of his pack, hung a full canteen at his waist, and was ready to go, as ready as he was going to get anyway. Quay unhitched the cart horses, while Jazel stripped the saddles and harness from the other two. It seemed hardly fair, leaving them in the middle of nowhere after they had carried them all the way from Kausus. It felt like years ago to Jezal, thinking back. He was a different man now from the one who had set out from that city across the plain. He almost winced to remember his arrogance and his ignorance and his selfishness. "Yeah," he shouted. His horse looked at him sadly without moving, then put its head down and began to nibble at the grass near his feet. He rubbed its back fondly. "Well, I suppose they will find their way in time, or not," grunted Pharaoh, drawing her sword. "What are you?" The curved blade chopped halfway through the neck of Jezel's horse, spattering warm, wet specks in his stricken face. Its front legs crumpled and it slid to the ground, toppled onto its side, blood gushing out into the grass. Pharaoh grabbed hold of one of its hooves, hauled it towards her with one hand and started hacking the leg from the carcass with short, efficient blows, while Jezel stared, his mouth open. She scowled up at him. "I am not leaving all this meat for the birds. It will not keep long. But we will eat well enough tonight, at least. Get that sack." Logan flung one of the empty feed bags to her and shrugged. "You can't get attached to things, Jezel. Not out here in the wild." No one spoke as they began to climb. They all were bent over and concentrating on the crumbling track beneath their shuffling feet. The path rose and turned back, time after time, and soon Jezel's legs were aching, his shoulders were sore, his face was damp with sweat. One step at a time, that was what West used to tell him when he was flagging on the long runs round the Agrient. One step at a time, and he had been right. Left foot, right foot, and up they went. After a spell of this repetitive effort, he stopped and looked down. It was amazing how high they had climbed in so short a time. He could see the foundations of the ruined fortress, gray outlines in the green turf at the foot of the pass. Beyond it, the rutted track led back through the crumpled hills towards all. Jezel gave a sudden shudder and turned back towards the mountains. Better to leave all that behind him. Logan slogged up the steep path, his worn boots scraping and crunching in the gravel and the dirt, the metal box in his pack, a dead weight that dragged on his shoulders and seemed to get heavier with each step, that dug into his flesh like a bag of nails even though it was wrapped in blankets. But Logan was not so very bothered by it. He was too busy watching Pharaoh's arse move as she walked ahead of him, lean muscles squeezing with every step under the stained canvas of her trousers. It was an odd thing. Before he'd fucked her, he hadn't thought about her that way at all. He'd been too concerned with trying to stop her running off or shooting him or stabbing one of the others. So busy watching her scowl that he hadn't seen her face. So busy watching her hands that he'd never noticed the rest of her. Now he couldn't think about anything else. Every movement of hers seemed fascinating. He'd catch himself watching her all the time, while they were on the move, while they were sitting down, while she was eating or drinking or talking or spitting, while she was pulling her boots on in the morning or pulling them off at night. To make matters worse, his cock was halfway hard the whole time from watching her out of the corners of his eyes and imagining her naked. It was getting to be quite an embarrassment. "What are you looking at?" Logan stopped and gazed up into the sun. Pharaoh was frowning down at him. He stood and shifted the pack on his back, rubbing at his sore shoulders, wiping a sheen of sweat from his forehead. He could thought up a lie easily enough. He'd been watching the magnificent mountain peaks. He'd been watching where he put his feet. He'd been checking that her pack was on right. But what would have been the point? They both knew well enough what he'd been looking at, and the others had pushed on well out of earshot. "I'm looking at your ass," he said, shrugging his shoulders. "Sorry, but it's a good one. No harm looking, is there?" She opened her mouth angrily, but he put his head down and trudged round her before she had the chance to speak, his thumbs hooked under the straps of his pack. When he'd got 10 paces or so, he looked over his shoulder. She was still standing there, hands on her hips, frowning up at him. He grinned back. "What are you looking at?" he said. They stopped for water in the cold, fresh morning, on a ledge above a plunging valley, through spreading trees heavy with red berries growing sideways from the bare rock. Jezel could see white water surging in its narrow bottom. Dizzying cliffs rose on the far side, sheets of grey stone not far from sheer, ending in towering crags high above, where dark birds flapped and crowed to each other, while swirls of white cloud turned in the pale sky beyond. A spectacular setting, if somewhat unsettling. Beautiful, murmured Jazel, but taking care not to get too close to the edge. Lodgen nodded. Reminds me of home. When I was a lad, I used to spend weeks at a time up in the high places, testing myself against the mountains. He took a swallow from the flask, then handed it to Jazel, staring up through narrowed eyes at the dark peaks. They always win, though. This empire's come and gone, and here they still are, looking down on it all. Here they'll still be, long after all of us have gone back to the mud. They look down on my home. He gave a long snort, then spat phlegm over the edge of the valley. Now they look down on nothing. Jazel took a swallow of water himself. Will you go back to the north after this? Maybe. I've some scores to settle. Some deep, hard scores. The Northman shrugged his shoulders. But if I let him lie, I dare say no one would be the worse off. I reckon they all think I'm dead, and no one's anything but relieved about it. Nothing to go back to? Lodgen winced. Nothing but more blood. My family's long dead and rotted, and those friends I didn't turn on and kill myself, I got killed with my pride and my stupidity. So much for my achievements. So much for my achievements. But you've still got time, eh? Jazel. A good chance at a nice, peaceful life. What will you do? Well, I've been thinking. He cleared his throat, suddenly nervous, as though giving voice to his plans made them far closer to reality. There's a girl back home, well, a woman, I suppose. My friend's sister. In fact, her name is R.D. I think that, perhaps, I love her. It was strange that he was discussing his innermost feelings with this man he had thought a savage, with this man who could understand nothing of the delicate rules of life in the Union, of the sacrifice that Jazel was considering. But somehow, it was easy to say. I've been thinking, well, if she'll have me, perhaps we might marry. That sounds like a good plan. Lodgen grinned and nodded. Marry her, and sow some seeds. Jazel raised his eyebrows. I don't know much about farming. The Northman spluttered with laughter. Not those kind of seeds, boy. He clapped him on the arm. One piece of advice, though. If you'll take one from the likes of me, find something to do with your life that don't involve killing. He bent and swung up his pack, shoved his arms through the straps. Leave the fighting to those with less sense. And he turned and struggled up the track. Jazel nodded slowly to himself. He touched one hand at the scar on his chin, his tongue finding the hole in his teeth. Lodgen was right. Fighting was not the life for him. He already had one scar too many. It was a bright day, the first time Pharaoh had been warm in a long while, and the sun felt good, hot and angry on her face, on her bare forearms, on the backs of her hands. The shadows of rock and branch were laid out sharp on the stony ground. The spray from the falling water that flowed beside the old track flashed as it fell through the air. The others had fallen behind. Longfoot, taking his time, smiling up at anything and everything, blathering on about the majesty of the views. Quay hunched up and dogged under the weight of his pack. Bayaz wincing and sweating, puffing as though he might fall dead at any minute. Luther moaning about his blisters to anyone who would listen, which was no one. So it was only her and Nine Fingers, striding up ahead in stony silence, just the way she liked it. She scrambled over a lip of crumbling rock and came upon a dark pool, lapping at a crescent of flat stones, water hissing and splattering down into it over piled-up rocks bearded with wet moss. A pair of twisted trees spread their branches out above, thin, fresh-budded leaves shimmering and rustling in the breeze. The sunlight sparkled, and insects skated and buzzed lazily on the rippling water. A beautiful place, most likely, if you thought that way. Pharaoh did not. Fish in there, she murmured, licking her lips. A fish would be nice, stuck on a twig over a fire. The bits of horse they had carried with them were all gone, and she was hungry. She watched the vague shapes flicker under the shimmering water as she squatted down to fill up her canteen. Lots of fish. Nine Fingers dumped his heavy pack and sat down on the rocks beside it, dragging his boots off. He rolled his trousers up above his knees. "What are you doing, Pink?" He grinned at her. "I'm going to tickle me some fish out of that pool. With your hands? You got clever enough fingers for that. I reckon you'd know." She frowned at him, but he only smiled, the wider skin creasing up round the corners of his eyes. "Watch and learn, woman." And he paddled out, bent over, lips pressed tight together with concentration, feeling gently around in the water. What's he up to? Luther dumped his pack down beside Pharaoh's and wiped his glistening face with the back of his hand. Fool thinks he can catch a fish. What, with his hands? Watch and learn, boy, muttered Nine Fingers. Aha. His face broke out into a smile. And here she is. The muscles in his forearm shifted as he worked his fingers under the water. Got it! And he snatched his hand up in a shower of spray. Something flashed in the bright sun, and he tossed it onto the bank beside them, leaving a trail of dark wet spots on the dry stones. A fish, flipping and jumping. cried Longfoot, stepping up beside them. Tricking fish out of the pool, is he? A most impressive and remarkable skill. I once met a man of the 1,000 Isles who was reckoned the greatest fisherman in the circle of the world. I do declare, he could sit upon the bank and sing. And the fish would jump into his lap. They would indeed. He frowned to find no one delighted by his tale. But now Bayaz was dragging himself over the lip, almost on hands and knees. His apprentice appeared behind him, face set hard. The first of the Magi tottered down, leaning heavily on his staff, and fell back against a rock. Perhaps we should camp here. He gasped for breath, sweat running down his gaunt face. You would never guess I once ran through this pass. I made it in 2 days. He let his staff drop from his trembling fingers, and it clattered down amongst the dry, gray driftwood near the water's edge. Long ago. I've been thinking, muttered Luther. Bayaz's tired eyes swiveled sideways, as though even turning his head might prove too much of an effort. Thinking and walking, pray do not strain yourself, Captain Luther. Why the edge of the world? The Magus frowned. Not for the exercise, I assure you. What we seek is there. After the destruction of Olcus, the fall of Glustrad, the 3 remaining sons of Eus met, Juvens, Bedesh, and Canidius. They discussed what should be done with the seed. Have that! Shouted Nine Fingers, pulling another fish from the water and flinging it onto the stones beside the first. Bayaz watched it, expressionless as it squirmed and flopped, mouth and gills gulping desperately at the suffocating air. Canidius desired to study it. He claimed he could turn it to righteous purposes. Juvens feared the stone, but knew of no way to destroy it, so he gave it into his brother's keeping. Over long years, though, as the wounds of the Empire failed to heal, he came to regret his decision. He worried that Canidius, hungry for power, might break the first law as Glustrad had done. He demanded the stone be put beyond use. At first the maker refused, and the trust between the brothers dwindled. I know this, for I was the one who carried the messages between them. Even then I learned since they were preparing the weapons that they would one day use against each other. Juvens begged, then pleaded, then threatened, and eventually Canidius relented. So the 3 sons of Eus journeyed to Chabolyan. No place more remote in the whole circle of the world, muttered Longfoot. That is why it was chosen. They gave up the seed to the spirit of the island, to keep safe until the end of time. They commanded the spirit never to release it, murmured Quay. My apprentice shows his ignorance again, returned Bayaz, glaring from under his bushy brows. Not never, Master Quay. Juvens was wise enough to know that he could not guess all outcomes. He realized that a desperate time might come, in some future age, when the power of this thing might be needed. So Bedesh commanded the spirit to release it only to a man who carried Juvens' staff. Longfoot frowned. Then where is it? Bayaz pointed to the length of wood he used for a stick, lying on the ground beside him, rough and unadorned. That's it, muttered Luther, sounding more than a little disappointed. What did you expect, Captain? Bayaz grinned sideways at him. 10 feet of polished gold, inlaid with runes of crystal, topped by a diamond the size of your head. The Magus snorted. Even I have never seen a gem that big. A simple stick was good enough for my master. He needed nothing more. A length of wood does not by itself make a man wise or noble or powerful, any more than a length of steel does. Power comes from the flesh, my boy, and from the heart, and from the head. From the head most of all. I love this pool, cackled Nine Fingers, tossing another fish out onto the rocks. Juvens, murmured Longfoot softly. And his brothers powerful beyond guessing, between men and gods. Even they feared this thing. They went to such pains to put it beyond use. Should we not fear it as they did? Bayaz stared at Pharaoh, his eyes glittering, and she stared back. Beads of sweat stood from his wrinkled skin, darkened the hairs of his beard, but his face was flat as a closed door. Weapons are dangerous to those who do not understand them. With Pharaoh Malgin's bow, I might shoot myself in the foot if I did not know how to use it. With Captain Luther's steel, I might cut my ally, had I not the skill. The greater the weapon, the greater the danger. I have the proper respect for this thing, believe me. But to fight our enemies, we need a powerful weapon indeed. Pharaoh frowned. She was yet to be convinced that her enemies and his were quite the same, but she would let it sleep, for now. She had come too far, and got too close, not to see this business through. She glanced over at Nine Fingers and caught him staring at her. His eyes flicked away, back to the water. She frowned deeper. He was always looking at her lately, staring and grinning and making bad jokes, and now she found herself looking at him more often than there was any need for. Patterns of light flowed across his face, reflected from the rippling water. He looked up again, and their eyes met, and he grinned at her, just for an instant. Pharaoh's frown grew deeper yet. She pulled her knife out, snatched up one of the fish and took its head off, slit it open and flicked its slimy guts out, plopping down into the water next to Nine Fingers' leg. It had been a mistake to fuck him, of course, but things had not turned out so very badly after all. Ha ha! Nine Fingers sent up another glittering spray of water, then he stumbled, clutching at the air. Ah! The fish flapped from his hands, a streak of flipping brightness, and the Northman crashed into the water on his face. He came up spitting and shaking his head, hair plastered to his skull. Bastard! Every man has, somewhere in the world, an adversary cleverer than himself. Bayaz stretched out his legs in front of him. Could it be, Master Nine Fingers, that you have finally found yours? Jezoi woke with a start. It was the middle of the night. It took him a dizzy moment to remember where he was, for he had been dreaming of home, of the Agrient, of sunny days and balmy evenings, of R.D. or someone like her smiling lopsided at him in his cozy living room. Now the stars were scattered bright and stark across the black sky, and the chill, sharp air of the high places nipped at Jezel's lips and his nostrils and the tips of his ears. He was back up in the broken mountains, half the width of the world from Adua, and he felt a pang of loss. At least his stomach was full, fish and biscuit, the first proper meal had eaten since the horse ran out. There was still warmth from the fire on the side of his face, and he turned towards it, grinning at the glowing embers and dragging his blankets up under his chin. Happiness was nothing more than a fresh fish and a fire still alight. He frowned. The blankets beside him, where Lodgen had been sleeping, were moving around. At first he took it for the Northmen turning in his sleep, but they carried on moving and did not stop. A slow, regular shifting, accompanied Jezel now realized, by a soft grunting sound. He had taken it at first for Bayaz snoring, but now he saw otherwise. Straining into the darkness, he made out Nine Fingers' pale shoulder and arm, thick muscles straining. Under his arm, squeezing hard at his side, there was a dark-skinned hand. Jezel's mouth hung open. Lodgen and Pharaoh, and from the sound of it there could be no doubt that they were coupling. What was more, not a stride from his head, he stared, watching the blankets bucking and shifting in the dim light from the fire. When had they? Why were they? How had they? It was a damned imposition is what it was. His old distaste for them flooded back in a moment, and his scarred lip curled. A pair of savages, rutting in full view. He had half a mind to get up and kick them as you might kick a pair of dogs who had, to the general embarrassment of all, unexpectedly taken to each other at a garden party. "Shit," whispered a voice. Jezel froze, wondering if one of them had seen him. There was a brief pause. That's it. The repetitive movement started up again, the blankets flapping back and forward slowly to begin with, then faster. How could they possibly have expected him to sleep through this? He scowled and rolled away, pulling his own covers over his head, and lay there in the darkness, listening to Nine Fingers' throaty grunting and Pharaoh's urgent hissing growing steadily louder. He squeezed his eyes shut and felt a sting of tears underneath his lids. Damn it, but he was lonely. Chapter 42, Coming Over. The road curved down from the west, down the bare white valley between two long ridges, all covered in dark pines. It met the river at the ford, the white flow running high with meltwater, fast flowing over the rocks and full of spit and fraught harning its name all right. "So that's it then," muttered Tull, lying on his belly and peering through the bushes. "I reckon," said Dogman, "'less there's another giant fortress anywhere on the river." From up here on the ridge, the Dogman could see its shape clear, towering great walls of sheer dark stones, perfectly six-sided, 12 strides high at the least, a massive round tower at each corner, the grey slate roofs of buildings round a courtyard in the midst. Just outside that there was a smaller wall, 6 sides again, half as high but still high enough, studded with a dozen smaller towers, one side back to the river, the other 5 had a wide moat dug round them, so the whole thing was made an island of sharp stone, one bridge out to it, and one bridge only, stretching to a gatehouse the size of a hill. "Shit on that," said Dow. "You ever seen walls the like of those? How the hell did Bethod get in there?" Dogman shook his head. "Don't hardly matter how. He won't fit his whole army in it. He won't want to," said Three Trees. "Not Bethod. That's not his way. He'd rather be outside, where he can move, waiting for his chance to catch him off guard." Grunted Grim, nodding. "Fucking Union," cursed Dow. "They're never on guard. All that time we followed Bethod up from the south and they bloody let him past without a fight. Now he's all walled up here, close to food and water, nice and happy, waiting for us." Three Trees clicked his tongue. "No point crying about it now, is there? Bethod got round you once or twice before, as I recall." "Ha, bastard's got one hell of a knack for turning up where he ain't wanted." Dogman looked down at the fortress and the river behind, and the long valley, and the high ground on the other side, covered with trees. "He'll have men up on the ridge opposite, and down there in those woods round the moat too, I shouldn't wonder." "Well, you got it all figured, don't you?" said Dow, looking sideways. "There's just one thing we still need to know. She suck your cock yet?" "What?" said the Dogman, caught not knowing what to say. Tull spluttered with laughter. Three Trees started chuckling to himself. Even Grim made a kind of sound, like breath, but louder. "Simple question, ain't it?" asked Dow. "Has she or has she not sucked it?" Dogman frowned and hunched his shoulders. "Shit on that. Tull could barely hold his giggling back." "She did what to it?" "She shit on it. You was right, Dow. They don't do it the same down there in the Union." Now they were all laughing, apart from the Dogman, of course. "Piss on the lot of you," he grunted. "Maybe you should suck each other's, and at least it might shut you up." Dow slapped him on the shoulder. "Don't think so. You know how Tool is for talking with his mouth full." Tull clamped his hand over his face and blew snot out of his nose. He was laughing so hard. Dogman gave him a look, but that was like hoping the look would stop a rock falling. It didn't. "All right now, best be quiet," muttered Three Trees, but still grinning. "Someone better take a closer look. See if we can work out where Bethod's boys are all at before the Union come fumbling up that road like a pack o' fools." Dogman felt his heart sinking. "One of us better. Which of you bastards is it going to be then?" Black Dow grinned as he slapped him on the shoulder. "I reckon whoever got to stick his twig in the fire last night should be the one to face the cold this morning, eh, lads?" Dogman crept down through the trees, bow in one hand with a shaft knocked to it, but the string not pulled back, for fear of letting it go by accident and shooting himself in the leg or some foolishness. He'd seen that happen before, and he'd no wish to be hopping back to the camp, trying to explain to the others how he got one of his own arrows through his foot. He'd never hear the end of it. He knelt and peered through the trees, looked down at the ground, bare brown earth, and patches of white snow, and piles of wet pine needles, and he stopped breathing. There was a footprint near him, half in mud and half in snow. The snow was melting and falling off and on. A print wouldn't have lasted long today. That meant it was made recent. The Dogman sniffed the air. Not much to smell, but it was harder to smell anything than the cold nose all pink and numb and full of cold snot. He crept the way the footprint was pointing. Looking all round, he saw another and another. Someone had come this way, no doubt, and not long ago. "You're the Dogman, ain't you?" He froze, heart thumping like big boots upstairs all of a sudden. He turned round to look where the voice came from. There was a man sitting on a fallen tree 10 strides away, lying back against a thick branch, hands clasped behind his head, stretched out like he was near asleep. He had long black hair hanging in his face, but one eye peered out at the dogman, watchful. He sat forward, slowly. "Now I'll leave these here," he said, pointing at a heavy axe half buried in the rotten trunk, and a round shield leaning near it. "So you know I'm looking to talk, and I'll come on over. How's that sound to you?" Dogman raised his bow and drew the string back. "Come on over if you must, but if you try more and talk, I'll put an arrow through your neck." "Fair enough." Longhair rocked himself forward and slithered off the trunk, leaving his weapons behind, and came on through the trees. He walked with his head stooped over. But he was a tall bastard still, holding his hands up in the air, palms out. All peaceful-looking, no doubt. But the dogman wasn't taking no chances. Peaceful-looking and peaceful are two different things. "Might I say," said the man as he came closer, "in the interests of working up some trust between us, that you never saw me. If I'd had a bow, I could've shot you where you stood. It was a fair point, but the dogman didn't like it any." "You got a bow?" "No, I don't, as it goes." "There's your mistake, then," he snapped. "You can stop there." "I believe I will," he said, standing a few strides distant. "So I'm the dogman, and you know it. Who might you be? You remember Rattleneck Eye? Of course, but you ain't him. No? I'm his son." Dogman frowned, and drew his bowstring back a touch tighter. "You'd best make your next answer a damn good one. Ninfingers killed Rattleneck's son. That's true. I'm his other son." But he was hardly more'n boy. Dogman paused, counting the winters in his head. "Shit. It's that long ago. That long ago. You've grown some. That's what boys do. You got a name now. Shivers, they call me." "How come?" he grinned. "Because my enemies shiver with fear when they face me." "That's so." "Not entirely," he sighed. "Might as well know now. First time I went out raiding, I got drunk and fell in the river having a piss. Current sucked my trousers off and dumped me half a mile downstream. I got back to the camp shivering worse than anyone had ever seen. Fruit sucked right up into my belly and everything." He scratched at his face. "Bloody embarrassment all round. Made up for it in the fighting, though, really. I got some blood on my fingers. Over the years. Not compared to you, I dare say, but enough for men to follow me, that's so." "How many?" 20 carls, or thereabouts. "They're not far away, but don't get nervous. Some of my father's people, from way back, and a few newer. Good hands, each man. Well, that's nice for you, to have a little crew. Been fighting for Bethod, have you? Man needs some kind of work. Don't mean we wouldn't take better. Can I put my hands down yet?" "No, I like 'em there. What you doing out here in the woods alone, anyhow?" Shivers pursed his lips, thoughtful. "Don't take me for a madman, but I heard a rumor you got Rudd 3 trees over here. That's a fact, is it now?" "And Tolduru Thunderhead, and Harding Grim, and Black Dowan all." Shivers raised his brows, leaned back against a tree, hands still up, while Dogman watched him careful. "Well, that's some weighty company you got there, all right. There's twice the blood on you 5 than on my 20. Those are some names, and no mistake, the sort of names men might want to follow. You looking to follow?" "Might be that I am." "And your Carls too? Them too?" It was tempting, the dogman had to admit. 20 Carls, and they'd know where Bethod was at, maybe something of what he'd got planned. That'd save him some skulking around in the cold woods, and he was getting good and tired of wet trees. But he was a long way off trusting this tall bastard yet. He'd take him back to the camp, and 3 trees could weigh up what to do. "All right," he said, "we'll see. Why don't you step off up the hill there, and I'll follow on a few paces behind." "All right," said Shivers, turning and trudging up the slope, hands still up in the air. "But watch what you do with that shaft, eh? I don't want to get stuck for you not looking where you're stepping. Don't worry about me, big lad. The dogman don't miss Noga." His foot caught on a root, and he lurched a step and fumbled his string. The arrow shot past Shivers' head and thudded wobbling into a tree just beyond. Dogman ended up on his knees in the dirt, looking up at him looming over, clutching an empty bough in one hand. "Huts," he muttered. If the man had wanted to, Dogman had no doubt he could have swung one of those big fists down and knocked his head off. Lucky you missed me, said Shivers. Can I put my hands down now? Dow started as soon as they walked into the camp, of course. Who the hell's this bastard? He snarled, striding straight up to Shivers and staring him out, bristling up to him with his axe clutched in his hand. It might have looked a touch comical, Dow being half a head shorter, but Shivers didn't seem much amused. Nor should he have. The dogman started, but he didn't get any further. He's a tall bastard, eh? I ain't talking up to a bastard like him. Sit down, big lad. And he threw his arm out and shoved Shivers over on his arse. The dogman thought he took it well, considering. He grunted when he hit the dirt, of course. Then he blinked. Then he propped himself on his elbows, grinning up at them. I reckon I'll just stay down here. Don't hold it against me, though, eh? I didn't choose to be tall, any more than you chose to be an arsehole. Dogman winced at that, expecting Shivers to get a boot in the fruits for his trouble. But Dow started to grin instead. Chose to be an arsehole. I like that. I like him. Who is he? His name's Shivers, said the dogman. He's Rattleneck's son. Dow frowned, but didn't Nine Fingers, his other son, but he'd be no more to work it out. Dow frowned, then shook his head. Shit. That long, eh? It looks like Rattleneck, came Tull's voice, his shadow falling across them. Bloody hell, said Shivers. I thought you didn't like tall folk? It's two of you standing on top of each other, ain't it? Just the one. Tull reached down and pulled him up by one arm like he was a child fell over. Sorry about that greeting, friend. Those visitors we get, we usually end up killing. I hope to be the exception, said Shivers, still gawping up at the thunderhead. So that must be Harding Grim. Said Grim, scarcely looking up from checking his shafts. And you're Three Trees? That I am, said the old boy, hands on his hips. Well, muttered Shivers, rubbing at the back of his head. I feel like I'm in deep water now, no mistake, deep water. Tull Duru and Black Dow and bloody hell. You're Three Trees, eh? I'm him. Well then, shit, my father always said you was the best man left in all the North. That if he ever had to pick a man to follow, you'd be the one. Till you lost to the bloody Nine, of course. But some things you can't help. Rud Three Trees, right before me now. Why've you come here, boy? Shivers seemed to have run out of words, so the dogman spoke for him. He says he's got 20 carls following him, and they all want to come over. Three Trees looked Shivers in the eye for a while. Is that a fact? Shivers nodded. You knew my father. He thought the way you did, and cut from his cloth. Serving Bethod sticks in my neck. Might be I think a man should pick his chief and stick to him. I always thought so, said Shivers. But that blade cuts both ways, no? A chief should look out for his people too, shouldn't he? Dogman nodded to himself. A fair point to his mind. Bethod don't care a shit for none of us no more if he ever did. He don't listen to no one now but that witch of his. Witch? Said Tull. Aye, this sorceress, this Corrib or whatever. The witch? The one who makes the mist? Bethod's dabbling with some dark company. And this war, there's no purpose to it. Angland? Who wants it anyway? We got land aplenty. He'll lead us all back to the mud. Long as there was no one else to follow, we stuck with it. But when we heard Rud Three Trees might still be alive, and with the Union, well, you decided to have a look, eh? We've had enough. Bethod's got some strange boys along. These Easterners from out past the Crinner, bones and hides men, you know, hardly men at all. Got no code, no mercy, don't hardly speak the same language we do. Fucking savages, the lot of them. Bethod's got some down in the Union fortress there, and they got all the bodies hung up on the walls, all cut with the bloody cross, guts hanging out, rotting. It ain't right. Then there's Calder and Scale tossing out orders like they know shit from porridge, like they got some names on their own besides their father's. Fucking Calder, growled Toole, shaking his head. Fucking Scale, hissed Dow, spitting on the wet ground. No bigger pair of bastards in all the North, said Shivers. And now I hear tell that Bethod's made a deal. What kind of a deal? What kind of a deal? Asked Three Trees. Shivers turned and spat over his shoulder. A deal with the fucking Shanka, that's what. Dogman stared. They all did. That was some evil kind of a rumor. With the Flatheads? How? Who knows? Might be that witch found some way to talk to him. Times are changing fast, and it ain't right, any of it. There's a lot of boys over there ain't happy. That's without getting started on that Feared. Dow frowned. Feared? I never heard of him. Where you lot been? Under the ice? They all looked at each other. "Pretty much," said the dogman. "Pretty much." Chapter 43. Cheap at the price. "You have a visitor, sir," muttered Barnum. His face, for some reason, was pale as death. "Clearly," snapped Glokta. "That was them knocking at the door, I assume." He dropped his spoon into his barely touched bowl of soup and licked sourly at his gums. A particularly disgusting excuse for a meal this evening. On Miss Schickel's cooking. If not her attempts to kill me. "Well, who is it, man?" "Well, who is it, man?" It's Archlector Zult ducked through the low doorway so as not to disturb his flawless white hair on the frame. "Ah, I see." He swept the cramped dining room with a scowl, lip wrinkled as though he had stumbled into an open sewer. "Don't get up," he spat at Glokta. "I wasn't planning to," Barnum swallowed. "Can I get your eminence any?" "Get out," sneered Salt, and the old servant nearly fell over in his haste to make it to the door. The Archlector watched him go with withering scorn. The good humor of our previous meeting seems a vaguely remembered dream. "Damn peasants," he hissed as he slid in behind Glokta's narrow dining table. "There's been another uprising near Keln, and this bastard the tanner was in the midst of it again. An unpopular eviction turned into a bloody riot. Lord Finster entirely misjudged the mood, got 3 of his guards killed and himself besieged in his manor by an angry mob, the half-wit. They couldn't get in, fortunately, so they satisfied themselves with burning down half the village." He snorted. "Their own damn village. That's what an idiot does when he gets angry. He destroys whatever's nearest, even if it's his own house. The open council are screaming for blood, of course. Peasant blood and lots of it. Now we have to get the Inquisition going down there. Root out some ringleaders, or some fools who can be made to look like them. It should be Finster himself we're hanging the dolt, but that's hardly an option." Glokta cleared his throat. "I will pack for Keln immediately. Tickling the peasantry. Hardly my choice of task, but... No, I need you for something else. Dagoska has fallen." Glokta raised an eyebrow. Not so great a surprise, though. Hardly enough of a shock, one would have thought, to squeeze such a figure as His Eminence into my narrow quarters. "It seems the Gurkish were let in by a prior arrangement. Treason, of course, but at a time like that hardly surprising. The Union forces were massacred, such as they were, but many of the mercenaries were merely enslaved, and the natives, by and large, were spared. Gurkish mercy, who could have thought it? Miracles do happen then." Salt flicked angrily at a speck of dust on one immaculate glove. "I hear that, when the Gurkish had broken into the citadel, General Visbruck killed himself rather than be captured. Well, I didn't think he had it in him. He ordered his body burned, so as not to give the enemy any remains to defile. Then he cut his own throat. A brave man. A courageous statement. He will be honored in open council tomorrow. How wonderful for him. A horrible death with honor is far preferable to a life in obscurity, of course." "Of course," said Glokta quietly. "A brave man? That is not all. An envoy has arrived on the very heels of this news. An envoy from the Emperor of Gurkhal. An envoy, indeed, apparently seeking peace." The Archlector said the word with a sneer of contempt. "Peace? This room seems rather small for an echo. Of course, Your Eminence, but why not?" "Why not? They have what they want. They have Dagoska, and there is nowhere further for them to go. Cost us more than we made from it, if anything. Nothing more than a trophy for the king. I dare say we're better off without it. The worthless rock." Glokta bowed his head. "Absolutely, Your Eminence, although it makes one wonder why we bothered fighting for it. Unfortunately, the loss of the place leaves you with nothing to be superior of." The Archlector looked almost pleased. "So it's back to plain old Inquisitor, eh? I suppose I'll no longer be welcome at the best social gatherings. But I have decided to let you keep the tide. As Superior of Adua." Glokta paused. "A considerable promotion, except that, surely, Your Eminence, that is, Superior Goyle's role. It is, and will continue to be, then. You will share the responsibilities. Goyle is the more experienced man, so he will be the senior partner and continue running the department. For you, I will find some tasks suited to your particular talents. I'm hoping that a little healthy competition will bring out the best in you both. More than likely, It will end with one of us dead, and we can all guess who the favorite is." Sult gave a thin smile, as though he knew precisely what Glokta was thinking. "Or perhaps it will simply demonstrate that one of you is superior to the other." He barked a joyless laugh at his own joke, and Glokta gave a watery, toothless grin of his own. "In the meantime, I need you to deal with this envoy. You seem to have a way of handling these cantics, though you might avoid beheading this one, at least for the time being." The Archlector allowed himself another minuscule smile. "If he's after anything more than peace, I want you to sniff it out. If we can get anything more than peace from him, then of course, sniff that out too. It would do no harm if we could avoid looking like we got our backs whipped." He stood awkwardly and maneuvered himself out from behind the table, all the while frowning as though the tightness of the room was an intentional affront to his dignity. "And please, Glokta, find yourself some better quarters. A superior of Adua living like this. It's an embarrassment." Glokta humbly bowed his head, causing an unpleasant stinging right down to his tailbone. "Of course, Your Eminence." The Emperor's envoy was a thick-set man with a heavy black beard, a white skull cap, and a white robe worked with golden thread. He rose and bowed humbly as Glokta hobbled over the threshold. "As earthy and humble-seeming as the last emissary I dealt with was airy and arrogant. A different kind of man, I suppose, for a different purpose. His voice was deep and rich, his mastery of the common tongue predictably excellent. Many people on our side of the sea were very disappointed when your corpse was not among those found in the citadel of Dagasta. I hope you will convey my sincere apologies to them." "I will do so. My name is Tulkas, and I am a counselor to Uthman al-Dasht, the Emperor of Gurkul." The envoy grinned, a crescent of strong white teeth in his black beard. "I hope I fare better at your hands than the last emissary my people sent to you." Glokta paused. "A sense of humor? Most unexpected. I suppose that would depend on the tone you take." Of course. Shabdal Islik Burai always was confrontational. That, and his loyalties were mixed. Tulkas' grin grew wider. He was a passionate believer. A very religious man. A man closer, perhaps, to church than to state. "I honor God, of course." And he touched his fingertips to his forehead. "I honor the great and holy prophet Kalul." He touched his head again. "But I serve," and his eyes slid up to Glokta's. "I serve only the Emperor." "Interesting. I thought that in your nation, church and state spoke with one voice." "It has often been so. But there are those among us who believe that priests should concern themselves with prayer, and leave the governing to the Emperor and his advisors." "I see. And what might the Emperor wish to communicate to us?" "The difficulty of capturing Dagasta has shocked the people. The priests had convinced them that the campaign would be easy, for God was with us, our cause was righteous, and so forth. God is great, of course," and he looked up to the ceiling, "but he is no substitute for good planning. The Emperor desires peace." Glokta sat silent for a moment. "The great Uthman al-Dasht, the mighty, the merciless, desires peace?" The envoy took no offense. "I am sure you understand that a reputation for ruthlessness can be useful. A great ruler, especially one of as wide and various a country as Gurkul, must first be feared. He would desire to be loved also, but that is a luxury. Fear is essential. Whatever you may have heard, Uthman is neither a man of peace nor of war. He is a man of what would be your word, necessity. He is a man of the right tool at the right time." "Very prudent," muttered Glokta. "Peace, now, mercy, compromise. These are the tools that suit his purposes, even if they do not suit the purposes of others." And he touched his fingers to his forehead. "And so he sends me, to find out if they suit you also. Well, well, well. The mighty Uthman al-Dasht comes with mercy and offers peace. These are strange times we live in. Tulkas, have the Gurkish learned to love their enemies? Or simply fear them? One need not love one's enemy, or even fear him, to desire peace. One need only love oneself. Is that so? It is. I lost 2 sons in the wars between our peoples. One at Ulriak in the last war. He was a priest, and burned in the temple there. The other died not long ago at the siege of Dagasta. He led the charge when the first breach was made. Glokta frowned and stretched out his neck. A hail of flatbow bolts, tiny figures falling in the rubble. That was a brave charge. War is harshest on the brave. True. True. I am sorry for your losses, though I feel no sorrow in particular. I thank you for your heartfelt condolences. God has seen fit to bless me with 3 more sons, but the spaces left by those 2 children lost will never close. It is almost like losing your own flesh. That is why I feel I understand something of what you have lost in these same wars. I am sorry for those losses also. Most kind. We are leaders. War is what happens when we fail, or are pushed into failure by the rash and the foolish. Victory is better than defeat, but not by much. Therefore, the Emperor offers peace, in the hope that this may be a permanent end to the hostilities between our great nations. We have no true interest in crossing the seas to make war, and you have no true interest in toeholds on the Cantic continent, so we offer peace. And is that all your offer? All. What will our people make of it, if we surrender Dagorska up to you, so dearly bought in the last war? Let us be realistic. Your entanglements in the north put you at a considerable disadvantage. Dagorska is lost. I would put it from your mind. Tulka seemed to think about it for a moment. However, I could arrange for a 12 chests to be delivered, as reparations from my emperor to your king. Chests of fragrant ebony wood, worked with golden leaf, carried by bowing slaves, preceded by humble officials of the emperor's government. And what would these chests contain? Nothing. They stared at each other across the room, except pride. You could say they contained whatever you wished. A fortune in Gurkish gold, in Cantic jewels, in incense from beyond the desert, more than the value of Dagorska itself. Perhaps that would mollify your people. Glokta breathed in sharply, and let it out. Peace. And empty boxes. His left leg had gone numb under the table, and he grimaced as he moved it, hissed through his gums as he forced himself out of his chair. I will convey your offer to my superiors. He was just turning away when Tulkas held out his hand. Glokta looked at it for a moment. Well, where's the harm? He reached out and squeezed it. I hope you will be able to persuade them, said the Gurkish envoy. So do I. Chapter 44. To the edge of the world. On the morning of their 9th day in the mountains, Logan saw the sea. He dragged himself to the top of yet another painful scramble, and there it was. The track dropped steeply away into a stretch of low, flat country, and beyond was the shining line on the horizon. He could almost smell it, a salty tang on the air with each breath. He would have grinned if it hadn't reminded him of home so much. The sea, he whispered. The ocean, said Bayaz. We have crossed the western continent from shore to shore, said Longfoot, grinning all the way across his face. We are close now. By afternoon they were closer still. The trail had widened to a muddy lane between fields, split up with ragged hedges, mostly brown squares of turned earth, but some green with fresh grass, or with the sprouts of vegetables, some waving tall with a grey, tasteless-looking winter crop. Logan had never known much about farming, but it was plain enough that someone had been working this ground, and recently. What kind of people live all the way out here? Murmured Luther, looking suspiciously out across the ill-tended fields. Descendants of the pioneers of long ago. When the empire collapsed, they were left out here alone. Alone they have flourished after a fashion. You hear that? Hissed Pharaoh, her eyes narrowed, already fishing an arrow from her quiver. Logan put his head up, listening. A thumping sound, echoing from some distance, then a voice, thin on the wind. He put his hand on the grip of his sword and crouched down. He crept to an unruly stretch of hedge and peered over, Pharaoh beside him. 2 men were struggling with a tree stump in the midst of a turned field, one chopping at it with an axe, the other watching, hands on hips. Logan swallowed, uneasy. These 2 hardly looked much of a threat, but looks could lie. It had been a long time since they met a living thing that hadn't tried to kill them. Calm now, muttered Bayaz. There is no danger here. Pharaoh frowned across at him. You've told us that before. Kill no one until I tell you, hissed the Magus, then called out in a language Logan didn't know, waving one arm over his head in a gesture of greeting. The 2 men jerked round, staring open-mouthed. Bayaz shouted again. The farmers looked at each other, then set down their tools and walked slowly over. They stopped a few strides away. An ugly-looking pair, even to Lojan's eye, short, stocky, rough-featured, dressed in colorless work clothes, patched and stained. They stared nervously at the 6 strangers, and at their weapons in particular, as though they'd never seen such people or such things before. Bayaz spoke to them warmly, smiling and waving his arms, pointing out towards the ocean. One nodded, answered, shrugged, and pointed down the track. He stepped through a gap in the hedge, off the field and into the road, or from soft mud to hard mud at least. He beckoned at them to follow while his companion watched suspiciously from the other side of the bushes. "He will take us to Conil," said Bayaz. "To who?" muttered Lojan, but the Magus did not answer. He was already striding westward after the farmer. Heavy dusk under a grim sky, and they trudged through an empty town after their sullen guide, a singularly ill-favored fellow, Jezel rather thought. But then peasants were rarely beauties in his experience, and he supposed that they were much the same the world over. The streets were dusty and deserted, weedy and scattered with refuse. Many houses were derelict, furry with moss and tangled with creeper. Those few that did show signs of occupation were, in the main, in a slovenly condition. "It would seem the glory of the past is faded here also," said Longfoot with some disappointment. "If indeed there ever was any." Bayaz nodded. "Glory is in short supply these days." A wide square opened out from the neglected houses. Ornamental gardens had been planted round the edge by some forgotten gardener, but the lawns were threadbare, the flower beds turned to briar patches, the trees no more than withered claws. Out of this slow decay rose a huge and striking building, or more accurately a jumble of buildings of various confused shapes and styles. 3 tall, round tapering towers sprouted from their midst, joined at their bases but separating higher up. One was broken off before the summit, its roof long fallen in, leaving naked rafters exposed. "A library," whispered Lojan under his breath. It scarcely looked like one to Jezel. "It is? The Great Western Library," said Bayaz, as they crossed the dilapidated square in the looming shadow of those 3 crumbling towers. "Here I took my first hesitant steps along the path of art. Here my master taught me the first law, taught it to me again and again until I could recite it flawlessly in every language known. This was a place of learning and wonder and great beauty." Longfoot sucked his teeth. "Time has not been kind to the place. Time is never kind." Their guide said a few short words and indicated a tall door covered in flaking green paint. Then he shuffled away, eyeing them all with the deepest suspicion. "You simply cannot get the help," observed the first of the Magi as he watched the farmer hurry off. Then he raised his staff and struck the door 3 good knocks. There was a long silence. "Library?" Jezel heard Pharaoh asking, evidently unfamiliar with the word. "For books," came Lojan's voice. "Books," she snorted. "Waste of fucking time." Vague sounds echoed from beyond the gate, someone approaching inside, accompanied by an irritated muttering. Now locks clicked and grated, and the weathered door squealed open. A man of an advanced age and pronounced stoop gazed at them in wonder, an unintelligible curse frozen on his lips, a lighted taper casting a faint glow over one side of his wrinkled face. "I am Bayaz, the first of the Magi, and I have business with Conil," the servant continued to gawp. Jezel half expected a string of drool to escape from his toothless mouth. It was hanging open so wide. Plainly he did not receive large numbers of visitors. The one flickering taper was pitifully inadequate to light the lofty hall beyond. Whitey tables sagged under tottering piles of books. Shelves rose up high on every wall, lost in the fusty darkness overhead. Shadows shifted over leather-bound spines of every size and color, on bundles of loose parchments, on scrolls rolled and carelessly stacked in leaning pyramids. Light sparked and flashed on silver gilt and gold ornamentation, and dull jewels set into tones of daunting size. A long staircase, banister highly polished by the passage of countless hands, steps worn down in the centers by the passage of countless feet, curved gracefully down into the midst of this accumulation of ancient knowledge. Dust sat thickly on every surface. One particularly monstrous cobweb became stickily tangled in Jezel's hair as he passed over the threshold, and he flicked and wrestled at it, face wrinkled in distaste. "The lady of the house," wheezed the doorman in a strange accent, "has already taken to her couch." "Then wake her," snapped Bayaz. "The hour grows dark, and I am in haste. We have no time to, Anu stood upon the steps. The hour grows dark indeed, when old lovers come calling at my door. A deep voice, smooth as syrup. She sauntered down the stairs with exaggerated slowness, one set of long nails trailing on the curving banister. She seemed perhaps of middle age, tall, thin, graceful, a curtain of long black hair falling over half her face. Sister, we have urgent matters to discuss. Ah, do we indeed? The one eye that Jezzel could see was large, dark, and heavy-lidded, rimmed faintly with sore, tearful pink. Languorously, lazily, almost sleepily it flowed over the group. How atrociously tiresome. I am weary, Corneille. I need none of your games. We all are weary, Bayaz. We all are terribly weary. She gave a long theatrical sigh as she finally glided to the foot of the steps and across the uneven floor towards them. There was a time when you were willing to play. You would play my games for days at a time, as I recall. That was long ago. Things change. Her face twisted with a sudden and unsettling anger. Things rot, you mean, but still. And her voice softened again to a deep whisper. We last remnants of the great order of Magi should at least try to remain civil. Come now, my brother, my friend, my sweet. There is no need for undue haste. The day grows late, and there is time for you all to wash away the dirt of the road, discard those stinking rags, and dress for dinner. Then we can talk over food, as civilized persons are wont to do. I so rarely have guests to entertain. She swept past Login, looking him admiringly up and down. And you have brought me such rugged guests. She lingered on Pharaoh with her eyes. Such exotic guests. Now she reached up and let a long finger trail across Jezzel's cheek. Such comely guests. Jezzel stood, rigid with embarrassment, entirely at a loss as to how to respond to this liberty. At close quarters her black hair was gray at the roots, no doubt heavily dyed. Her smooth skin seemed wrinkled, and a touch yellow, no doubt heavily powdered. Her white gown was dirty round the hem, had a noticeable stain on one sleeve. She seemed as old as Bayaz looked, or perhaps older yet. She peered into the corner where Quai was standing, and frowned. What manner of guest this is, I am not sure, but you are welcome all at the Great Western Library. Welcome all. Jezzel blinked at the looking-glass, his razor hanging from one nerveless hand. Only a few moments before he had been reflecting on the journey, now that it was finally approaching its end, and congratulating himself on how much he had learned. Tolerance and understanding, courage and self-sacrifice. How he had grown as a man, how much he had changed. Congratulations no longer seemed appropriate. The looking-glass might have been an antique, his reflection in it dark and distorted, but there could be no doubt that his face was a ruin. The pleasing symmetry was gone forever. His perfect jaw was skewed round sharply to the left, heavier on one side than the other. His noble chin was twisted at a slovenly angle. The scar began on his top lip, as no more than a faint line, but it split in two and gouged brutally into the bottom one, dragging it down and giving him the appearance of having a permanent and unsightly leer. No effort on his part helped. Smiling made it far worse yet, exposing the ugly gaps in his teeth, more suited to a prize fighter or a bandit than to an officer of the king's own. The one mercy was that he would very likely die on the return journey, and no one of his old acquaintance would ever see him so horribly disfigured. A meager consolation indeed. A single tear plopped down into the basin under his face. Then he swallowed, and he took a shuddering breath, and he wiped his wet cheek with the back of his forearm. He set his jaw in its strange new configuration, and he gripped the razor tightly. The damage was done now, and there could be no going back. Perhaps he was an uglier man, but he was a better man too, and at least, as Login would have said, he was still alive. He gave the razor a flourish and scraped the patchy, straggling hair from his cheeks, from before his ears, from his throat. On his lip, his chin, and around his mouth he left it be. The beard looked well on him, he rather thought, as he rubbed the razor dry. Or it went a meager way towards hiding his disfigurement at least. He pulled on the clothes that had been left for him, a fusty-smelling shirt and breeches of an ancient and absurdly unfashionable design. He almost laughed at his ill-formed reflection when he was finally prepared for dinner. The carefree denizens of the Agrient would hardly have recognized him. He hardly recognized himself. The evening repast was not all that Jezzel might have hoped for at the table of an important historical figure. The silverware was tarnished in the extreme, the plate worn and cracked. The table itself slanted to the point that Jezzel was constantly expecting the entire meal to slide off onto the dirty floor. Food was served by the shambling doorman, at no faster pace than he had answered the gate, each dish arriving colder and more congealed than the last. First came a sticky soup of surpassing tastelessness. Next was a piece of fish so overcooked it was little more than ashes. Then, most recently, a slab of meat so undercooked as to be virtually still alive. Bayaz and Cornel ate in stony silence, staring at each other down the length of the table in a way which seemed calculated to make everyone uncomfortable. Quay did nothing more than pick at his food, his dark eyes flicking intently between the two elderly magi. Longfoot stuck into every course with relish, smiling round at the company as though they were all enjoying themselves equally. Lodgen was holding his fork in his fist, frowning and stabbing clumsily at his plate as if it were a troublesome shanka, the ballooning sleeves of his ill-fitting doublet trailing occasionally in his food. Jezzel had little doubt that Pharaoh could have used the cutlery with great dexterity had she wished. But she chose instead to eat with her hands, staring aggressively at anyone who met her gaze as if daring them to tell her not to. She had on the same travel-stained clothes she had worn for the past week, and Jezzel wondered for a moment if she had been provided with a dress to wear. He nearly choked on his dinner at the notion. Neither the meal, nor the company, nor the surroundings were quite what Jezzel would have chosen. But the fact was that they had largely run out of food a few days before. Rations in that space of time had included a handful of chalky roots dug from the mountainside by Lodgen, 6 tiny eggs stolen by Pharaoh from a high nest, and some berries of indescribable bitterness which Longfoot had plucked from a tree, apparently at random. Jezzel would happily have eaten his plate. He frowned as he hacked at the gristly meat on it, wondering if the plate might indeed be a tastier option. "Is the ship still seaworthy?" growled Bayaz. Everyone looked up, the first words to have been said in quite some time. Cornel's dark eye regarded him coldly. "Do you mean that ship on which Juvens and his brothers sailed to Shabulian? What other? Then no, it is not seaworthy. It is rotted to green mulch in its old dock, but do not fear. Another was built, and when that rotted also, another after it. The latest rocks on the tides, tethered to the shore, well coated with weed and barnacle, but kept always crude and victualled. I have not forgotten my promise to our master. I marked well my obligations." Bayaz's brows drew angrily down. "Meaning, I suppose, that I did not. I did not say so. If you hear a reproach, it is your own guilt that goads you, not my accusation. I take no sides, you know that. I never have." "You speak as though sloth were the greatest of virtues," muttered the first of the Magi. "Sometimes it is, if acting means taking part in your squabbles. You forget, Bayaz, that I have seen all this before, more than once, and a wearisome pattern it seems to me. History repeats itself. Brother fights brother. As Juvens fought Glustrod, as Canidius fought Juvens, so Bayaz struggles with Kalul. Smaller men in a bigger world, but with no less hatred, and no more mercy. Will this sordid rivalry end even as well as the others, or will it be worse?" Bayaz snorted. "Let us not pretend you care, or would drag yourself 10 strides from your couch if you did." "I do not care. I freely admit it. I was never like you or Khalul, or even like Zacharias or Yulve. I have no endless ambition, no bottomless arrogance, no, indeed not you." Bayaz sucked disgustedly at his gums and tossed his fork clattering down onto his plate. "Only endless vanity, unbottomless idleness. Mine are small vices and small virtues. To see the world recast according to my own great designs has never interested me. I have always been content with the world as it is, and so I am a dwarf among giants." Her heavy-lidded eyes swept slowly over her guests, one by one. "And yet dwarves crush no one underfoot." Jezzel coughed as her searching stare fell on him, and gave careful attention to his rubbery meat. "Long is the list of those you have trodden over in pursuit of your ambitions, is it not, my love?" Bayaz's displeasure began to weigh on Jezzel as heavily as a great stone. "You need not speak in riddles, sister. growled the old man. I would have your meaning. Ah, I forgot. You are a straight talker, and cannot abide deception of any kind. You told me so just after you told me you would never leave me, and just before you left me to find another. That was not my choice. You wrong me, Cornel. I wrong you, she hissed, and now her anger pressed hard at Jezzel from the other side. How, brother? Did you not leave? Did you not find another? Did you not steal from the Maker? First his secrets, then his daughter. Jezzel squirmed and hunched his shoulders, feeling as squeezed as a nut in a vice. Ptolemy, do you remember her? Bayaz's frown grew frostier yet. I have made my mistakes and still pay for them. Not a day passes that I do not think of her. How outrageously noble of you, sneered Cornel. No doubt she would swoon with gratitude if she could hear you now. I think on that day too now and then, the day the old time ended. How we gathered outside the house of the Maker, thirsty for vengeance. How we put forth all of our art and all of our anger, and could not make a scratch upon the gates. How you whispered to Ptolemy in the night, begging her to let you in. She pressed her withered hands to her chest. Such tender words you used. Words I never dreamed were in you. Even an old cynic like me was moved. How could an innocent like Ptolemy deny you, whether it was her father's gates or her own legs she was opening? And what was her reward, brother, for her sacrifices, for helping you, for trusting you, for loving you? It must have been quite the dramatic scene, the three of you up on the roof. A foolish young woman, her jealous father, and her secret lover. She snorted bitter laughter. Never a happy formula, but it can rarely have ended quite so badly. Father and daughter both. The long drop to the bridge. Canidius had no mercy in him, growled Bayaz, even for his own child. Before my eyes he threw his daughter from the roof. We fought, and I cast him down in flames. So was our master avenged. Oh, well done. Cornel clapped her hands in mock delight. Everyone loves a happy ending. Tell me only one thing more. What was it that made you weep so long for Ptolemy when I could never make you shed a tear? Did you decide you like your women pure, brother? And she fluttered her eyelashes in an ironical show, one strangely unsettling on that ancient face. Innocence. That most fleeting and worthless of virtues, one to which I have never laid claim? Perhaps then, sister, the one thing you have never laid. Oh, very good, my old love, very fine. It was always your ready wit that I enjoyed above all else. Khalul was the more skillful lover, of course, but he never had your passion or your daring. She speared a chunk of meat viciously with her fork. Traveling to the edge of the world at your age, to steal that thing our master forbade. Courage indeed. Bayaz sneered his contempt down the table. What would you know of courage, you who have loved no one in all these long years but yourself, who have risked nothing, and given nothing, and made nothing, you who have let all the gifts our master gave you rot? Keep your stories in the dust, sister. No one cares, and me least of all. The two magi glared at each other in icy silence, the atmosphere heavy with their seething fury. The feet of Nine Fingers' chair squealed gently as he edged it cautiously away from the table. Pharaoh sat opposite, her face locked in a frown of the deepest suspicion. Malachus Quai had his teeth bared, his fierce eyes fixed on his master. Jezal could only sit and hold his breath, hoping that the incomprehensible argument did not end with anyone on fire, especially not him. Well, ventured Brother Longfoot, I for one would like to thank our host for this excellent meal. The two old magi locked him simultaneously with their pitiless gazes. Now that we are close to our final destination, and the navigator swallowed and stared down at his plate. Never mind. Pharaoh sat naked, one leg drawn up against her chest, picking at a scab on her knee, and frowning. She frowned at the heavy walls of the room, imagining the great weight of old stone all around her. She remembered frowning at the walls of her cell in Uthman's palace, pulling herself up to look through the tiny window, feeling the sun on her face and dreaming of being free. She remembered the chafing iron on her ankle, and the long, thin chain, so much stronger than it had looked. She remembered struggling with it, and chewing on it, and dragging at her foot until the blood ran from her torn skin. She hated walls. For her, they had always been the jaws of a trap. Pharaoh frowned at the bed. She hated beds, and couches, and cushions. Soft things make you soft, and she did not need them. She remembered lying in the darkness on a soft bed when she was first made a slave, when she was still a child and small and weak, lying in the darkness and weeping to be alone. Pharaoh dug savagely at the scab and felt blood seep from underneath. She hated that weak, foolish child who had allowed herself to be trapped. She despised the memory of her. Pharaoh frowned most of all at Nine Fingers, lying on his back with the blankets rucked and rumpled round him, his head tipped back and his mouth hanging open, eyes closed, breath hissing soft in his nose, one pale arm flung out wide at an uncomfortable-looking angle, sleeping like a child. Why had she fucked him, and why did she keep doing it? She should never have touched him. She should never have spoken to him. She did not need him, the ugly, big pink fool. She needed no one. Pharaoh told herself she hated all these things, and that her hatred could never fade. But however she curled her lip, and frowned, and picked her scabs, it was hard to feel the same. She looked at the bed, at the dark wood shining in the glow from the embers in the fireplace, at the shifting blobs of shadow in the wrinkled sheet. What difference would it really make to anyone if she lay there rather than on the cold, wide mattress in her own room? The bed was not her enemy, so she got up from the chair and padded over and slid down into it with her back to Nine Fingers, taking care not to wake him. Not for his sake, of course, but she had no wish to explain herself. She wriggled her shoulders, moving backwards towards him where it was warmer. She heard him grunt in his sleep, felt him roll. She tensed to spring out of the bed, holding her breath. His arm slid over her side and he muttered something in her ear. Meaningless sleep sounds, breath hot on her neck. His big warm body pressed up tight against her back no longer made her feel so trapped, the weight of his pale hand resting gently against her ribs. His heavy arm around her felt almost good. That made her frown. Nothing good ever lasts for long, and so she slid her hand over the back of his and felt his fingers and the stump of the one that was missing, pressing into the spaces between hers, and she pretended that she was safe and whole. Where was the harm? She held onto the hand tightly and pressed it to her chest, because she knew it would not be for long. Chapter 45. Before the storm. Welcome, gentlemen. General Polder, General Croy. Bethod has retreated as far as the White Flow, and it does not seem likely that he will find any more favorable ground on which to face us. Burr took a sharp breath, sweeping the gathering with a grave expression. I think it very likely that there will be a battle tomorrow. Good show, shouted Polder, slapping his thigh with great aplomb. My men are ready, murmured Croy, lifting his chin one regulation inch. The two generals and the many members of their respective staffs glowered at each other across the wide space of Burr's tent, every man trying to outdo his opposite number with his boundless enthusiasm for combat. West felt his lip curling as he watched them. Two gangs of children in a schoolyard could scarcely have behaved with less maturity. Burr raised his eyebrows and turned to his maps. Luckily for us, the architects who built the fortress at Dunbreck also surveyed the surrounding land in some detail. We are blessed with highly accurate charts. Furthermore, a group of Northmen have recently defected to our cause, bringing with them detailed information on Bethod's forces, position, and intentions. Why should we believe the word of a pack of northern dogs? Sneered General Croy, who have no loyalty even to their own king. Had Prince Ladisla been more willing to listen to them, sir, intoned West, he might still be with us, as might his division. General Polder chuckled heartily to himself, and his staff joined him. Croy, predictably, was less amused. He shot a deadly glare across the tent, one which West returned with an icy blankness. Burr cleared his throat and soldiered on. Bethod holds the fortress of Dunbreck. The point of his stick tapped at the black hexagon, positioned to cover the only significant road out of Angland, where it fords the river Whiteflow, our border with the north. The road approaches the fortress from the west, cutting eastwards down a wide valley between two wooded ridges. The body of Bethod's forces are encamped near the fortress, but he means to mount an attack westward up the road as soon as we show our faces. And Burr's stick slashed along the dark line, swishing against the heavy paper. The valley through which the road passes is bare, open grass with some gorse and rocky outcroppings, and will give him ample room for maneuver. He turned back to the assembled officers, stick clenched tight, and placed his fists firmly on the table before him. I mean to fall into his trap, or at least to seem to. Croy finally broke off, glowering at West, to reply with a sullen, "Yes, Lord Marshal. Your division is to deploy astride the road and push steadily eastwards towards the fortress, encouraging Bethod to launch his attack slowly and steadily, with no heroics. General Polder's division, meanwhile, will have worked its way through the trees on top of the northern ridge, here," and his stick tapped at the green blocks of the wooded high ground, "just forward of General Croy's position." "Just forward of General Croy's position," grinned Polder, as though he was being shown special favor. Croy scowled with disgust. "Just forward, yes," continued Burr. "When Bethod's forces are entirely occupied in the valley, it shall be your task to attack them from above, and take them in the flank. It is important that you wait until the Northmen have been fully engaged, General Polder, so that we can surround them, overwhelm them, and hope to bag the majority at one throw." If they are allowed to retire to the fords, the fortress will cover their retreat, and we will be unable to pursue. Reducing Dunbreck might take us months. "Of course, my Lord Marshal," exclaimed Polder. "My division will wait until the last moment, you may depend upon it." Croy snorted. "That should present no difficulty. Arriving late is a specialty of yours, I understand. There would be no need for a battle if you had intercepted the Northmen last week, rather than allowing them to get around you." Polder bristled. "Easy for you to say, while you were sitting on the right wing doing nothing. It's fortunate they didn't pass by in the night. You might have taken their retreat for an assault and fled with your entire division." "Gentlemen, please!" roared Burr, smashing the table with his stick. "There will be fighting enough for every man in the army, that I promise you, and if each man does his part, there will be ample glory too." "We must work together if this plan is to bear fruit," he burped, and grimaced and licked his lips sourly, while the two generals and their staffs glowered at one another. West would almost have laughed, had men's lives not hung in the balance, his own among them. "General Croy," said Burr, in the tone of a parent addressing a wayward child, "I wish to make sure that you understand your orders." "To deploy my division in line astride the road," hissed Croy, "and to advance slowly and in good order, eastwards down the valley towards Dunbreck, drawing Bethod and his savages into an engagement." "Indeed, General Polder?" "To move my division out of sight through the trees, just ahead of General Croy's regiments, so that at the last moment I can charge down on the northern scum and take them in the flank." Burr managed a smile. "Correct. An excellent plan, Lord Marshal, if I may." Polder tugged happily at his mustaches. "You can depend upon it that my horse will cut them to pieces." "To pieces? I am afraid you will not have any cavalry, General," said West in an emotionless monotone. "The woods are dense, and horse will be useless to you there. They might even alert the Northmen to your presence, a risk we cannot take. But my cavalry," muttered Polder, stricken with woe. "My best regiments, they will be kept here, sir," droned West, "near Marshal Burr's headquarters and under his direct control, as a reserve. They will be deployed if they are needed." Now it was Polder's fury he met with a stonewall stare, while the faces of Croy and his staff broke out in broad, neat, utterly joyless smiles. "There's one last point that you should all bear in mind. There are some reports that Bethod has called on reinforcements. Some manner of wild men, savages from across the mountains to the north. Keep your eyes open and your flanks well screened. You will receive word from me tomorrow when it is time to move, most likely before first light. That is all." "Can we really rely on them to do what they are told?" muttered West, as he watched the two surly groups file from the tent. "What choice do we have?" The Marshal threw himself into a chair with a grimace and rested his hands on his belly, frowning up at the great map. "I wouldn't worry. Croy has no option but to move down the valley and fight. What about Polder? I wouldn't put it past him to find some excuse to stay sitting in the woods." The Lord Marshal grinned as he shook his head. "And leave Croy to do all the fighting. What if he were to beat the Northmen on his own and take all the glory for himself?" "No, Polder could never risk that. This plan gives them no choice but to work together. He paused, looking up at West. "You might want to treat the pair of them with a touch more respect. Do you think they deserve it, sir?" "Of course not. But if, for instance, we should lose tomorrow, one of them will most likely step into my boots. Then where will you be?" West grinned. "I'll be finished, sir. But my being polite now won't change that. They hate me for what I am, not what I say. I might as well say what I please while I can. I suppose you might at that. They're a damn nuisance, but their folly can be predicted. It's Bethod that worries me. Will he do what we want him to?" Burr burped and swallowed and burped again. "Damn this damn indigestion." Three Trees and the dogman were sprawled on a bench outside the tent flap, an odd pair in amongst the well-starched press of officers and guards. "Smells like battle to me," said Three Trees as West strode up to them. "Indeed," West pointed after Croy's black uniformed staff. "Half the army are going down the valley tomorrow morning, hoping to draw Bethod into a fight." He pointed to Polder's crimson entourage. "The other half are going up into the trees, and hope to surprise them before they can get away." Three Trees nodded slowly to himself. "Sounds like a good plan. Nice and simple," said the dogman. West winced. He could hardly bear to look at the man. "We'd have no plan at all if you hadn't brought us that information," he managed to say through gritted teeth. "Are you sure we can trust it?" "Sure as we can be," said Three Trees. Dogman grinned. "Shivers is all right, and from what I've scouted up, I reckon it's true. No promises, of course not. You deserve a rest. We wouldn't say no. I've arranged a position for you up at the far left of the line, at the end of General Polder's division, up in the trees, on the high ground. You should be well out of the action there. The safest place in the whole army tomorrow. I shouldn't wonder. Dig in and make yourself a fire. And if things go right, we'll talk again over Bethod's dead body." And he held out his hand. Three Trees grinned as he took it. "Now that's our kind of language, furious. You take care now." He and the dogman started to trudge away up the slope towards the tree line. Colonel West, he knew who it was before he turned. There weren't many women in the camp that would have had much to say to him. Cathal, standing in the slush, a borrowed coat wrapped around her. She looked somewhat furtive, somewhat shamefaced, but the sight of her still somehow brought up a sudden surge of anger and embarrassment. It was unfair, he knew. He had no rights over her. It was unfair, but that only made it worse. All he could think of was the side of the dogman's face and her grunting. So horribly surprising. So horribly disappointing. "You'd better go with them," said West with an icy formality, scarcely able to bring himself to say anything at all. "Safest place." He turned away, but she brought him up short. "It was you, wasn't it? Outside the tent the other night." "Yes, I'm afraid it was. I simply came to check if there was anything you needed," he lied. "I really had no idea who you would be with. I certainly never meant for you to." "The dogman," he muttered, face suddenly crunching up with incomprehension. "Him? Why him instead of me?" was what he wanted to say. But he managed to stop himself. I know you must think. You've no need to explain yourself to me," he hissed, though he knew he'd just asked her to. "Who cares what I think?" He spat it out with a deal more venom than he had intended, but his own loss of control only made him angrier, and he lost more. "I don't care what you choose to fuck." She winced and stared down at the ground beside his feet. "I didn't mean to well. I owe you a lot, I know. It's just that you're too angry for me. That's all." West stared at her as she trudged off up the hill all to the Northmen, hardly able to believe his ears. She was happy to bed that stinking savage, but he was too angry. It was so unfair he almost choked on his rage. Chapter 46. Questions. Colonel Glokta charged into his dining room in a tremendous hurry, wrestling manfully with the buckle on his sword belt. Damn it, he fumed. He was all thumbs. Couldn't, damn it. "You need some help with that?" asked Schickel, sitting wedged in behind the table, black burns across her shoulders, cuts hanging open, dry as meat in the butcher's shop. "No, I do not need bloody help," he shrieked, flinging his belt onto the floor. "What I need is for someone to explain what the hell is going on here. This is a disgrace." I will not have members of my regiment sitting around naked, especially with such unsightly wounds. Where's your uniform, girl? I thought you were more worried about the prophet. Never mind about him, snapped Glokta, worming his way onto the bench opposite her. What about Bayaz? What about the first of the Magi? Who is he? What's he really after, the old bastard? Shickle smiled a sweet smile. Oh, that. I thought everyone knew that. The answer is yes, muttered the colonel, mouth dry, eager as a schoolboy. The answer is, she laughed and slapped at the bench beside her. Thump, 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 thump. The answer is, thump, thump, thump. Glokta's eyes snapped open. It was still half dark outside. Only a faint glow was coming through the curtains. Who comes belting at the door at this hour? Good news comes in the daylight. Thump, thump, thump. Yes, he screeched. I'm crippled, not deaf. I damn well hear you. Then open the bloody door. The voice came muffled from the corridor, but there was no mistaking the Styrian note. Vitari, the bitch. Just what one needs in the middle of the night. Glokta did his best to stifle his groans as he carefully disentangled his numb limbs from his sweaty blanket, rolling his head gently from side to side, trying to stretch some movement into his twisted neck, and failing. Thump, thump. I wonder, when was the last time I had a woman beating down my bedroom door? He snatched his cane from its place, resting against the mattress, then pressed one of his few teeth hard into his lip, grunting softly to himself as he wormed his way down the bed and let one leg flop off onto the boards. He threw himself forward, eyes squeezed shut at a withering pain through his back, and finally reached sitting, gasping as though he had run 10 miles. Fear me, all must fear me, if I can just get out of bed, that is. Thump. I'm coming, damn it. He footed his cane on the floor and rocked himself up to standing. Careful, careful. The muscles in his mutilated left leg were shaking violently, making his toeless foot twitch and flop like a dying fish. Damn this hideous appendage. It would feel like someone else's if it didn't hurt so much. But calm, calm. We must be gentle. Shh, he hissed, like a parent trying to soothe a wailing child, kneading softly at his ruined flesh and trying to breathe slow. Shh. The convulsions slowly calmed to a more manageable trembling. About the best that we can hope for, I fear. He was able to pull his nightshirt down and shuffle to the door, flip the key angrily round in the lock, and pull it open. Vitari stood outside in the corridor, draped against the wall, a darker shape in the shadows. You, he grunted, hopping to the chair. You just can't stay away, can you? What is your fascination with my bedchamber? She sauntered through the door, peering around scornfully at the miserable room. Perhaps I just like seeing you in pain. Glokta snorted, rubbing gingerly at his burning knee. Then you must be wet between the legs right now. Surprisingly, no. You look like death. When don't I? Did you come to mock my looks, or have we some business? Vitari folded her long arms and leaned against the wall. You need to get dressed. More excuses to see me naked? Salt wants you? No, she rolled her eyes. Oh no, we can take our time. You know how he is. Where are we going? You'll see when we get there. And she upped her pace, making him gasp and wince, snorting his aching way through the dim archways, down the shadowy lanes and the grey courtyards of the Agrient, colorless in the thin light of early morning. His clumsy boots crunched and scraped in the gravel of the park. The grass was heavy with cold dew, the air thick with dull mist. Trees loomed up, black and leafless claws in the murk, and then a towering, sheer wall. Vitari led him towards a high gate, flanked by 2 guards. Their heavy armor was worked with gold. Their heavy halberds were studded with gold. The golden sun of the Union was stitched into their surcoats. Knights of the body. The king's personal guard. The palace, muttered Glokta. No, the slums. Genius. Halt. One of the 2 knights raised his gauntleted hand, voice echoing slightly from the grill in his tall helmet. State your names and business. Superior Glokta. He hobbled to the wall and leaned against the damp stones, pressing his tongue into his empty gums against the pain in his leg. As for the business, ask her. This wasn't my idea. I can damn well tell you that. Practical Vitari. And the Archlector is expecting us. You know that already, fool, I told you on the way out. If it were possible for a man in full armor to appear hurt, this one did. It is a matter of protocol that I ask everyone. Just get it open, barked Glokta, pressing his fist into his trembling thigh. While I can still lurch through on my own. The man thumped angrily on the gate, and a small door opened inside it. Vitari ducked through, and Glokta limped after her. Along a path of carefully cut stones through a shadowy garden, drops of cold water clung to the budding branches, dripped from the towering statuary. The cawing of a crow somewhere out of sight seemed ridiculously loud in the morning stillness. The palace loomed up ahead of them, a confusion of roofs, towers, sculptures, ornamental stonework outlined against the first pale glow of morning. "What are we doing here?" hissed Glokta. "You'll find out." He limped up a step, between towering columns and two more knights of the body, still and silent enough to have been empty suits of armor. His cane clicked on the polished marble floor of an echoing hallway, half lit by flickering candles, the high walls covered entirely with dim friezes, scenes of forgotten victories and achievements, one king after another, pointing, brandishing weapons, reading proclamations, standing with their chests puffed out in pride. He struggled up a flight of steps, ceiling and walls carved entirely in a glorious pattern of golden flowers, flashing and glittering in the candlelight, while Vitari waited impatiently for him at the top. "Their being priceless doesn't make them any easier to climb, damn it. Down there," she muttered at him. A worried-looking group were gathered round a door 20 strides away. A knight of the body sat bent over on a chair, his helmet on the floor beside him, his head in his hands, fingers pushed through curly hair. 3 other men stood, huddled together, their urgent whispering rebounding from the walls and echoing down the hallway. "Aren't you coming?" Vitari shook her head. "He didn't ask for me." The 3 men looked up at Glokta as he limped towards them. And what a group to find muttering in a palace corridor before daybreak. Lord Chamberlain Hoff was wearing a quickly flung-on nightgown, his puffy face stricken as though by a nightmare. Lord Marshal Varus had one collar of his rumpled shirt sticking up, the other down, his iron-grey hair shooting off his skull at all angles. High Justice Moravia's cheeks were gaunt, his eyes were rimmed with red, and there was a slight tremble to his liverish hand as he raised it to point at the door. "In there," he whispered. "A terrible business! Terrible! Whatever shall be done?" Glokta frowned, stepped past the sobbing guard and limped over the threshold. "It was a bedchamber, and a magnificent one. This is a palace, after all." The walls were papered with vivid silk, hung with dark canvases in old gilt frames. An enormous fireplace was carved from brown and red stone to look like a miniature Cantic temple. The bed was a monstrous 4-posted creation, whose curtains probably enclosed more space than Glokta's entire bedroom. The covers were flung back and rumpled, but there was no sign of the former occupant. One tall window was standing ajar, and a chill breeze washed in from the grey world outside, making the flames on the candles dance and flutter. Archlector Zult was standing near the center of the room, frowning thoughtfully down at the floor on the other side of the bed. If Glokta had expected him to be as disheveled as his 3 colleagues outside the door, he was disappointed. His white gown was spotless, his white hair neatly brushed, his white gloved hands clasped carefully before him. "Your Eminence," Glokta was saying as he shuffled up. Then he noticed something on the floor, dark fluid, glistening black in the candlelight. Blood. How very unsurprising. He hobbled a little further. The corpse lay on its back on the far side of the bed. Blood was spattered on the white sheets, smeared over the boards and across the wall behind, had soaked up into the hem of the opulent drapes by the window. The ripped nightshirt was soaked through with it. One hand was curled up, the other was torn off, ragged, just beyond the thumb. There was a gaping wound on one arm, a chunk of flesh missing, as though it were bitten away. One leg was broken and bent back on itself, a snapped-off length of bone poking through split flesh. The throat had been so badly mauled that the head was barely attached. But there was no mistaking the face, seeming to grin up at the fine stucco work on the ceiling. Teeth bared, eyes wide, bulging open. "Crown Prince Raynol has been murdered," muttered Glokta. The Archlector raised his gloved hands and slowly, softly clapped 2 fingertips against his palm. "Oh, very good. It is for just such insights that I sent for you. Yes, Prince Reynold has been murdered. A tragedy, an outrage, a terrible crime that strikes at the very heart of our nation and at every one of its people. But that is far from the worst of it. The Archlector took a long breath. The king has no siblings, Glokta, do you understand? Now he has no heirs. When the king dies, where do you suppose our next illustrious ruler will come from? Glokta swallowed. I see. What a towering inconvenience. From the open council, an election, sneered Salt. An election, sneered Salt. The open council, voting for our next king, a few hundred self-serving half-wits who can't be trusted to vote for their own lunch without guidance, Glokta swallowed. I would almost be enjoying His Eminence's discomfort, were my neck not on the block beside his. We are not popular with the open council. We are reviled by them. Few more so. Our actions against the Mercers, against the Spicers, against Lord Governor Worms, and more besides. None of the nobles trust us. And if the king dies, how is the king's health? Not good. Salt frowned down at the bloody remains. All our work could be undone at this one stroke. Unless we can make friends in the open council, Glokta, while the king yet lives, unless we can curry enough favor to choose his successor, or at least to influence the choice. He stared at Glokta, blue eyes glittering in the candlelight. Votes must be bought, and blackmailed, coaxed and threatened our way. And you can depend upon it that those 3 old bastards outside are thinking just the same thing. How will I stay in power? With which candidate should I align myself? Whose votes can I control? When we announce the murder, we must assure the open council that the killer is already in our hands. Then swift and brutal and highly visible justice must be done. If the vote does not go our way, who knows what we could end up with? Rock on the throne, or Ishur, or Eugen. Salt gave a horrified shudder. We will be out of our jobs at best. At worst, several bodies found floating by the docks. That is why I need you to find me the prince's murderer. Now. Glokta looked down at the body, or what remains of it. He poked at the gouge out of Reynald's arm with the tip of his cane. We have seen wounds like these before. On that corpse in the park, months ago, an eater did this. Or at least we are meant to think so. The window tapped gently against its frame on a sudden cold draft. An eater who climbed in through the window, unlike one of the Prophet's agents to leave such clues behind. Why not simply vanished, like Devust? A sudden loss of appetite, are we meant to suppose? Have you spoken to the guard? Zolt waved his hand dismissively. He says he stood outside the door all night as usual. He heard a noise, entered the room, found the prince as you see him, still bleeding. The window open. He sent immediately for Hoff. Hoff sent for me. And I for you. The guard should be properly questioned nonetheless. Glokta peered down at Reynald's curled-up hand. There was something in it. He bent with an effort, his cane wobbling under his weight, and snatched it up between 2 fingers. Interesting. A piece of cloth. White cloth, it seemed, though mostly stained dark red now. He flattened it out and held it up. Gold thread glittered faintly in the dim candlelight. I have seen cloth like this before. What is that? Snapped Salt. Have you found something? Glokta stayed silent. Perhaps, but it was very easy. Almost too easy. Glokta nodded to Frost, and the albino reached forward and pulled the bag from the head of the Emperor's envoy. Tulkas blinked in the harsh light, took a deep breath, and squinted round at the room. A dirty white box, too brightly lit. He took in Frost, looming at his shoulder. He took in Glokta, seated opposite. He took in the rickety chairs, and the stain table, and the polished case sitting on top of it. He did not seem to notice the small black hole in the very corner opposite him, behind Glokta's head. He was not meant to. That was the hole through which the Archlector watched the proceedings. The one through which he hears every word that is said. Glokta watched the envoy closely. It is in these early moments that a man often gives away his guilt. I wonder what his first words will be. An innocent man would ask what crime he is accused of. Of what crime am I accused? Asked Tulkas. Glokta felt his eyelid twitch. Of course a clever guilty man might easily ask the same question. Of the murder of Crown Prince Reynold. The envoy blinked and sagged back in his chair. My deepest condolences to the royal family, and to all the people of the Union on this black day. But is all this really necessary? He nodded down at the yards of heavy chain wrapped round his naked body. It is, if you are what we suspect you might be, I see. Might I ask if it will make any difference that I am innocent of any part in this heinous crime? I doubt it will, even if you are. Glokta tossed the blood-stained fragment of white cloth onto the table. This was found clasped in the prince's hand. Tulkas frowned at it, puzzled, just as if he never saw it before. It matches exactly with a tear in a garment found in your chambers, a garment also stained liberally with blood. Tulkas looked up at Glokta, eyes wide, just as though he has no idea how it got there. How would you explain this? The envoy leaned forwards across the table as far as he could with his hands chained behind him, and spoke swift and low. Please attend to me, Superior. If the Prophet's agents have discovered my mission and they discover everything sooner or later, they will stop at nothing to make it fail. You know what they are capable of. If you punish me for this crime, it will be an insult to the Emperor. You will slap away his hand of friendship, and slap him in the face besides. He will swear vengeance, and when Uthman ul-Dost has sworn my life means nothing, but my mission cannot fail. The consequences for both our nations, please, Superior. I beg of you, I know you for an open-minded man. An open mind is like to an open wound, growled Glokta. Vulnerable to poison, liable to fester, apt to give its owner only pain. He nodded to Frost, and the albino placed the paper of confession carefully on the tabletop and slid it towards Tulkas with his white fingertips. He put the bottle of ink beside it and flipped open the brass lid. He placed the pen nearby, all neat and crisp as a sergeant major could wish for. This is your confession. Glokta waved his hand at the paper. In case you were wondering, I am not guilty, muttered Tulkas, his voice hardly more than a whisper. Glokta twitched his face in annoyance. Have you ever been tortured? No. Have you ever seen torture carried out? The envoy swallowed. I have. Then you have some inkling of what to expect. Frost lifted the lid on Glokta's case. The trays inside lifted and fanned out like a huge and spectacular butterfly unfurling its wings for the first time, exposing Glokta's instruments in all their glittering, hypnotic, horrible beauty. He watched Tulka's eyes fill with fear and fascination. I am the very best there is at this. Glokta gave a long sigh and clasped his hands before him. It is not a matter for pride. It is a matter of fact. You would not be with me now if it were otherwise. I tell you so you can have no doubts, so you can answer my next question with no illusions. Look at me. He waited for Tulka's dark eyes to meet his. Will you confess? There was a pause. I am innocent, whispered the ambassador. That was not my question. I will ask it again. Will you confess? I cannot. They stared at each other for a long moment, and Glokta was left in no doubt. He is innocent. If he could steal over the wall of the palace and in through the prince's window without being noticed, surely he could have stolen out of the Agrient and away before we were any the wiser. Why stay and sleep, leaving his blood-stained garment hanging in the cupboard, waiting for us to discover it? A trail of clues so blatant a blind man could follow them. We are being duped. And not even subtly. To punish the wrong man, that is one thing. But to allow myself to be made a fool of, that is another. One moment, murmured Glokta. He struggled out of his chair to the door, shut it carefully behind him, hobbled wincing up the steps to the next room and went in. What the hell are you up to in there? The arch-lector snarled at him. Glokta kept his head bowed in a position of deep respect. I'm trying to establish the truth, Your Eminence. You are trying to establish what? The closed council are waiting for a confession, and you're blathering about what? Glokta met the arch-lector's glare. What if he is not lying? What if the Emperor does desire peace? What if he is innocent? Salt stared back at him, cold blue eyes wide open with disbelief. Did you lose your teeth in Gurkul or your fucking mind? Who cares a shit for innocent? What concerns us now is what must be done. What concerns us now is what is necessary. What concerns us now is ink on paper, you. He was near frothing at the mouth, fists clenching and unclenching with fury. "You crippled shred of a man. Make him sign, then we can be done with this and get to licking arses in the open council." Glokta bowed his head still lower. "Of course, Your Eminence. Now is your perverse obsession with the truth going to cause me any more trouble tonight? I'd rather use a needle than a spade, but I'll dig a confession out of this bastard either way. Must I send for Goyle?" "Of course not, Your Eminence. Just get in there, damn you, and make him sign." Glokta shuffled out of his room, grumbling, stretching his neck to either side, rubbing his sore palms, working his aching shoulders round his ears and hearing the joints click. A difficult interrogation. Severard was sitting cross-legged on the floor opposite, his head resting against the dirty wall. "Has he signed? Of course. Lovely. Another mystery solved, eh, Chief? I doubt it. He's no eater. Not like Schickel was, anyway. He feels pain, believe me." Severard shrugged. She said the talents were different for each of them. She did. But still, Glokta wiped at his runny eye, thinking. Someone murdered the prince. Someone had something to gain from his death. I would like to know who, even if no one else cares. There are some questions I still need to ask. The guard at the prince's chambers last night. I want to speak to him. The practical raised his brows. "Why, you've got the paper, haven't we? Just bring him in." Severard unfolded his legs and sprang up. "All right then, you're the boss." He pushed himself away from the greasy wall and sauntered off down the corridor. One Night of the Body, coming right up, Chapter 47. "Holding the line. Did you sleep?" asked Pike, scratching at the less burned side of his ruined face. "No. You?" The convict-turned-sergeant shook his head. "Not for days," murmured Jalenhorn wistfully. He shaded his eyes with a hand and squinted up towards the northern ridge, a ragged outline of trees under the iron-gray sky. "Polder's division already set off through the woods?" "Before first light," said West. "We should hear that he's in position soon, and now it looks as if Croy's ready to go. You have to respect his punctuality at least." Below Burr's command post, down in the valley, General Croy's division was moving into battle order. 3 regiments of the King's Own Foot formed the center, with a regiment of levies on the higher ground on either wing and the cavalry just behind. It was an entirely different spectacle from the ragged deployment of Ladislaw's makeshift army. The battalions flowed smoothly forwards in tightly ordered columns, tramping through the mud, the tall grass, the patches of snow in the hollows. They halted at their allotted positions and began to spread out into carefully dressed lines, a net of men stretching right across the valley. The chill air echoed with the distant thumping of their feet, the beating of their drums, the clipped calls of their commanders. Everything clean and crisp and according to procedure. Lord Marshal Burr thrust aside his tent flap and strode out into the open air, acknowledging the salutes of the various guards and officers scattered about the space in front with sharp waves of his hand. "Colonel," he growled, frowning up at the heavens. Still dry, then. The sun was a watery smudge on the horizon, the sky thick white with streaks of heavy gray darker bruises hanging over the northern ridge. "For the moment, sir," said West. "No word from Polder yet." "No, sir. But it might be hard going. The woods are dense." Not as dense as Polder himself, West thought, but that hardly seemed the most professional thing to say. "Did you eat yet?" "Yes, sir. Thank you." West had not eaten since last night, and even then not much. The very idea of food made him feel sick. "Well, at least one of us did." Burr placed a hand sourly on his stomach. "Damned indigestion. I can't touch a thing." He winced and gave a long burp. "Pardon me." And there they go. General Croy must finally have declared himself satisfied with the precise positioning of every man in his division, because the soldiers in the valley had begun to move forward. A chilly breeze blew up and set the regimental standards, the flags of the battalions, the company ensigns snapping and fluttering. The watery sun twinkled on sharpened blades and burnished armor, shone on gold braid and polished wood, glittered on buckles and harness. All advanced smoothly together, as proud a display of military might as could ever have been seen. Beyond them, down the valley to the east, a great black tower loomed up behind the trees, the nearest tower of the fortress of Dunbreck. "Quite the spectacle," muttered Burr. 15,000 fighting men, perhaps all told, and almost as many more up on the ridge. He nodded his head at the reserve. 2 regiments of cavalry, dismounted and restless down below the command post. Another 2,000 there, waiting for orders. He glanced back towards the sprawling camp, a city of canvas, of carts, of stacked-up boxes and barrels. Spread out in the snowy valley, black figures crawling around inside. And that's without counting all the thousands back there, cooks and grooms, smiths and drivers, servants and surgeons. He shook his head. Some responsibility, all that, eh? You wouldn't want to be the fool who had to take care of all that lot. West gave a weak smile. No, sir. It looks like, murmured Jalenhorm, shading his eyes and squinting down the valley into the sun. Are those eyeglass? Snapped Burr, and a nearby officer produced one with a flourish. The marshal flicked it open. Well, well, who's this now? A rhetorical question, without a doubt. There was no one else it could be. Bethod's Northmen, said Jalenhorm, ever willing to state the obvious. West watched them rush across the open ground through the wobbling round window of his own eyeglass. They flowed out from the trees at the far end of the valley, near to the river, spreading out like the dark stain creeping from a slit wrist. Dirty gray and brown masses congealed on the wings, thralls, lightly armed. In the center, better-ordered ranks took shape, dull metal gleaming, mail and blade. Bethod's carles, no sign of any horse. That made West more nervous than ever. He had already had one near-fatal encounter with Bethod's cavalry, and he did not care to renew the acquaintance. Feels good to actually see the enemy at last, said Burr, voicing the exact opposite of West's own feelings. They move smartly enough, that's sure. His mouth curved up into a rare grin. But they're moving right where we want them to. The trap's baited and ready to spring. Hey, Captain. He passed the eyeglass to Jalenhorm, who peered through it and grinned himself. Right where we want them, he echoed. West felt a good deal less confident. He could clearly remember the thin line of Northmen on the ridge, right where Ladisla had thought he wanted them. Croy's men halted, and the units shuffled into perfect position once again, just as calmly as if they stood on a vast parade ground. Lines 4 ranks deep, reserve companies drawn up neatly behind, a thin row of flatbowmen in front. West just made out the shouted orders to fire, saw the first volley float up from Croy's line, shower down in amongst the enemy. He felt his nails digging painfully into his palm as he watched, fists clenched tight, willing the Northmen to flee. Instead, they sent back a well-organized volley of their own, and then began to surge forward. Their battle cry floated up to the officers outside the tent, that unearthly shriek, carrying on the cold air. West chewed at his lip, remembering the last time he heard it, echoing through the mist. Hard to believe it had only been a few weeks ago. Again he was guiltily glad to be well behind the lines, though a shiver down his back reminded him that it had done little good on that occasion. Bloody hell, said Jalenhorm. No one else spoke. West stood, teeth gritted, heart thumping, trying desperately to hold his eyeglass steady as the Northmen charged full-blooded down the valley. Croy's flatbows gave them one more volley, then pulled back through the carefully prepared gaps in the carefully dressed ranks, forming up again behind the lines. Spears were lowered, shields were raised, and in virtual silence, it seemed, the Union line prepared to meet the howling Northmen. Contact! The Union ranks seemed to wave and shift somewhat. The watery sunlight seemed to flash more rapidly on the mass of men. A vague rattling drifted on the air. Not a word was said in the command post. Each man was squinting through his eyeglass, or peering into the sun, craning to see what was happening down in the valley, hardly daring even to breathe. After what seemed a horribly long time, Burr lowered his eyeglass. Good. They're holding. It seems your Northmen were right, West. We have the advantage in numbers, even without Polder. When he gets here, it should be a rout. Up there, muttered West, on the southern ridge. Something glinted in the tree line. And again, metal. Cavalry, sir, I'd bet my life on it. It seems Bethod had the same idea as us, but on the other wing. Damn it, hissed Burr. Send word to General Croy that the enemy has horse on the southern ridge. Tell him to refuse that flank and prepare to be attacked from the right. One of the adjutants leaped smoothly into his saddle and galloped off in the direction of Croy's headquarters, cold mud flying from his horse's hooves. More tricks, and this may not be the last of 'em. Burr snapped the eyeglass closed and thumped it into his open palm. This must not be allowed to fail, Colonel West. Nothing must get in the way. Not Polder's arrogance, not Croy's pride, not the enemy's cunning. None of it. We must have victory here today. It must not be allowed to fail. No, sir. But Wes was far from sure what he could do about it. The Union soldiers were trying to be quiet, which meant they made about as much racket as a great herd of sheep being shoved indoors for shearing, moaning and grunting, slithering on the wet ground, armor rattling, weapons knocking on low branches. Dogman shook his head as he watched. Lucky thing there's no one out here, or we'd have been heard long ago. Hiss, dow! These fools couldn't creep up on a corpse. No need for you to be making noise, hissed Three Trees up ahead, then beckoned them all forward. It was a strange feeling, marching with such a big crew again. There were 20 of Shiva's carls along with them, and quite an assortment. Tall men and short, young and old, all manner of different weapons and armor, but all pretty well seasoned from what the dogmen could tell. Halt! And the Union soldiers clattered and grumbled to a stop, started sorting themselves out into a line, spread across the highest part of the ridge. A great long line, the dogmen reckoned, judging from the number of men had watched going up into the woods, and they were right at the far end of it. He peered off into the empty trees on their left and frowned. Lonely place to be, the end of a line. But the safest, he muttered to himself. What's that? Asked Cathal, sitting down on a great fallen tree trunk. Safe here, he said in her tongue, managing a grin. He still didn't have half an idea how to behave around her. There was a hell of a gap between them in the daylight. A yawning great gap of race, and age, and language that he wasn't sure could ever be bridged. Strange, how the gap dwindled down to nothing at night. They understood each other well enough in the dark. Maybe they'd work it out in time, or maybe they wouldn't. And that'd be that. Still, he was glad she was there. Made him feel like a proper human man again, instead of just an animal slinking in the woods, trying to scratch his way from one mess to another. He watched a Union officer break off from his men and walk towards them, strut up to Three Trees, some kind of a polished stick wedged under his arm. General Polder asks that you remain here on the left wing to secure the far flank. He spoke slow and very loud, as though that'd make him understood if they didn't talk the language. All right, said Three Trees. The division will be deploying along the high ground, to your right, and he flicked his stick thing towards the trees where his men were slowly and noisily getting ready. We will be waiting until Bethod's forces are well engaged with General Croy's division, and then we will attack and drive them from the field. Three Trees nodded. You need our help with any of that. Frankly, I doubt it, but we will send word if matters change. And he strutted off to join his men, slipping a few paces away and nearly going down on his arse in the muck. He's confident, said the dogman. Three Trees raised his brows. Bit too much if you're asking me, but if it means he leaves us out, I reckon I can live with it. Right then, he shouted, turning round to the carls. Get hold of that tree trunk and drag it up along the brow here. Why? Asked one of them, sitting rubbing at one knee and looking sullen. So you got something to hide behind if Bethod turns up, barked Dow at him. Get to it, fool. The carls downed their weapons and set to work, grumbling. Seemed that joining up with the legendary Rudd Three Trees was less of a laugh than they'd hoped. Dogman had to smile. They should have known. Leaders don't get to be legendary by handing out light duty. The old boy himself was stood frowning into the woods as Dogman walked up beside him. You worried, Chief? It's a good spot up here for hiding some men, a good spot for waiting till the battle's joined, then charging down. It is, grinned the dogman. That's why we're here. And what? Bethod wouldn't have thought of that. Dogman's grin started to fade. If he's got men to spare, he might think they'd be well used up here, waiting for the right moment, just like we are. He might send them through these trees here and up this hill to right where we're sitting. What happened then, do you reckon? We'd set to killing each other, I dare say, but Bethod don't have men to spare, according to Shivers and his boys. He's outnumbered worse'n 2-to-1 as it is. Maybe, but he likes to cook up surprises. All right, said Dogman, watching the carls heaving the fallen tree trunk around so it blocked off the top of the slope. All right, so we drag a tree across here, and we hope for the best. Hope for the best, grunted Three Trees. Just when did that ever work? He strode off to mutter to Grim, and Dogman shrugged his shoulders. If a few hundred carls did turn up all of a sudden, they'd be in a fix, but there weren't much he could do about it now. So he knelt down beside his pack, pulled out his flint and some dry twigs, stacked it all up careful, and started striking sparks. Shivers squatted down near him, palms resting on his axe handle. "What are you at? What does it look like?" Dogman blew into the kindling, watched the flames spreading out. "I'm making me a fire. Ain't we waiting for a battle to start?" Dogman sat back, pushed some of the dry twigs closer in, and watched them take light. "Aye, we're waiting, and that's the best time for a fire, I reckon. War's all waiting, lad. Weeks of your life, maybe, if you're in our line of work. You'd spend that time being cold, or you could try to get comfortable." He slid his pan out from his pack and onto the fire. New pan, and a good one. He'd got it off the Southerners. He unwrapped the packet inside. 5 eggs there, still whole. Nice, brown, speckled eggs. He cracked one on the edge of the pan, poured it in, heard it hiss, grinning all the while. Things were looking up, all right. Hadn't had eggs in a good long time. It was as he was cracking the last one that he smelled something, just as the breeze turned. Something more than eggs cooking. He jerked his head up, frowning. "What?" asked Cathal. "Nothing, most likely. But it was best not to take chances. You wait here a moment and watch these, eh? All right?" Dogman clambered over the fallen trunk, made for the nearest tree and leaned against it, squatting on his haunches, peering down the slope. Nothing to smell, that he could tell. Nothing to see in the trees, either just the wet earth patched with snow, the dripping pine branches and the still shadows. Nothing. Just 3 trees got him nervous with his talk about surprises. He was turning back when he caught a whiff again. He stood up, took a few paces downhill, away from the fire and the fallen tree, staring into the woods. 3 trees came up beside him, shield on his arm, sword drawn and clutched in his big fist. "What is it, Dogman? You smell something." "Could be," he sniffed again, long and slow, sucking the air through his nose, sifting at it. "Most likely nothing. Don't nothing me, Dogman. Your nose has got us out of a scrape or 2 before now." "What you smell?" The breeze shifted, and this time he caught it full. Hadn't smelled it in a while, but there was no mistaking it. "Shit," he breathed. "Shanka." "Oi!" And the Dogman looked round, mouth open. Cathal was just climbing over the fallen tree, the pan in her hand. "Eggs are done," she said, grinning at the 2 of them. 3 trees flailed his arm at her and bellowed at the top of his lungs. "Everyone get back behind the—" A bowstring went, down in the brush. Dogman heard the arrow, felt it whiz past in the air. They're not the best of archers, on the whole, the flatheads, and it missed him by a stride or 2. It was just piss-poor luck it found another mark. "Ah," said Cathal, blinking down at the shaft in her side. "Ah," and she fell down just like that, dropping the pan in the snow. Then Dogman was running up the hill towards her, his breath scraping cold in his throat. Then he was scrabbling for her arms, saw 3 trees take a hold round her knees. It was a lucky thing she went heavy. Not heavy at all. An arrow or 2 shot past. One stuck wobbling in the tree trunk, and they bundled her over and took cover on the other side. "There's Shanka down there," growled Dow, crouching down behind the tree, spinning his axe round and round in his hand. "Fucking bastards! Shanka, this far south," someone was saying. Dogman took Cathal under the arms and pulled her groaning back to the hollow by the fire, her heels kicking at the mud. "They shot me," she muttered, staring down at the arrow, blood spreading out from it into her shirt. She coughed, looked up at the Dogman, eyes wide. "They're coming!" Shivers was shouting. "Ready, boys!" Men were drawing their weapons, tightening their belts and their shield straps, gritting their teeth, and thumping each other on the backs, making ready to fight. Grim was up behind the tree, shooting arrows down the hill. "Calm as you like." "I gotta go," said the Dogman, squeezing at Cathal's hand. "But I'll be back, all right? You just sit tight, you hear? I'll be back, what?" No. He had to pry her fingers away from his. He didn't like doing it, but what choice did he have? "No," she croaked at his back as he scrambled towards the tree, and the thin line of carles hunching down behind it. A couple kneeling up to shoot their own bows. An ugly spear came over the trunk and thudded into the earth just beside him. Dogman stared at it, then slithered past, up onto his knees not far from Grim, looking down the slope. Fucking shit. The trees were alive with flatheads. The trees below, The trees to their left, the trees to their right, dark shapes moving, flapping shadows, swarming up the hill. Hundreds of them, it seemed like. Off to their right, the Union soldiers were shouting and clattering, confused, armor clanking as they set their spears. Arrows hissed angry up out of the woods, flitted down into them. Fucking shit! Maybe start shooting, eh? Grim loosed a shaft, pulled another out of his quiver. Dogman snatched out an arrow himself, but there were so many targets he could hardly bring himself to pick one, and he shot too high, cursing all the while. They were getting close now, close enough for him to see their faces, if you could call them faces. Open flapping jaws, snarling and full of teeth, hard little eyes, full of hate. Clumsy weapons clubs with nails in, axes made from chipped stone, rust-spotted swords stolen from the dead. Up they came, seeming fast as wolves through the trees. Dogman got one in the chest, saw it drop back. He hit another through the leg, but the rest weren't slowing. Ready! He heard 3 trees roaring, felt men standing up around him, lifting their blades, their spears, their shields to meet the charge. He wondered how a man was meant to get ready for this. A flathead came springing through the air over the tree, mouth wide open and snarling. Dogman saw it there, black in the air, heard a great roar in his ear. Then Tull's sword ripped into it and flung it back, blood spraying out of it like water from a smashed bottle. Another came scrambling up, and 3 trees took its arm clean off with his sword, smashed it back down the slope with his shield. More Ramaeum were coming now, and still more, swarming over the fallen trunk in a crowd. Dogman shot one in the face at no more than a stride away, pulled his knife out and stabbed it in the gut, screaming as loud as he could, blood leaking warm over his hand. He tore its club from its claw as it fell and swung it at another, missed and reeled away. Men were shouting and stabbing and hacking all over. He saw Shivers wedge a Shanka's head against the tree with his boot, lift his shield high above his head, and ram the metal rim deep into its face. He knocked another sprawling with his axe, spraying blood into Dogman's eyes, then caught a third in his arms as it sprang over the tree, and they rolled onto the wet dirt together, flopping over and over. The Shanka came out on top, and Dogman smashed it in the back with the club. Once, twice, 3 times, and Shivers shoved it off, and scrambled up, stomped on the back of its head. He charged past, hacking another flathead down just as it spitted a squealing Carl through the side with a spear. Dogman blinked, trying to wipe the blood from his eyes on the back of his sleeve. He saw Grim lift his knife and stab it through a flathead's skull, the blade sliding out its mouth and nailing it tight to a tree trunk. He saw Tull smashing his great fist into a Shanka's face, again and again until its skull was nothing but red pulp. A flathead sprang up onto the tree above him, spear raised, but before it could stab him, Dal leaped up and chopped its legs out from under it. It spun in the air, screaming. Dogman saw a Shanka on top of a Carl, taking a great bite out of his neck. He snatched the spear out of the ground behind him and flung it square into the flathead's back. It fell, gibbering and clawing over its own shoulders, trying to get to the thing. But it was stuck clean through. Another Carl was thrashing around, roaring, a Shanka's teeth sunk into his arm, punching at it with his other hand. Dogman took a step to help him, but before he got there, a flathead came at him with a spear. He saw it in good time and dodged round it, slashed it across the eyes with his knife as it came past, then cracked the club down on the back of its skull, felt it crunch like a breaking egg. He turned to face another, a damn big one. It opened its jaws at him and snarled, drool running out from its teeth, a great axe in its claws. "Come on!" he screamed at it, raising the club and the knife. Before it could come at him, 3 trees had stepped up behind it and split it open from shoulder to chest. Blood spattered out and it groveled in the mud. It managed to get up a ways somehow, but all that did was put its face in the best place for Dogman to stab his knife into. Now the Shanka were falling back and the Carls were shouting and hacking them down as they turned. The last one squawked and went for the tree, trying to scramble over. It gibbered as Dow's sword hacked a bloody gash across its back, all red meat and splinters of white bone. It fell tangled over a branch, twitched and lay still, its legs dangling. "They're done," roared Shivers, his face spotted with blood under his long hair. "We did 'em!" The Carls cheered and shouted and shook their weapons. Leastways, most of 'em did. There were a couple lying still, and a few more laid out wounded, groaning, gurgling through clenched teeth. The dogmen didn't reckon they felt much like celebrating. Neither did Three Trees. "Shut up, you fools. They're gone for now, but there'll be more. That's the thing with flatheads, there's always more. Get them bodies out of the way, salvage all the arrows we can get, wound them before today's through." The dogman was already limping back towards the smoldering fire. Cathal was lying where he'd left her, breathing fast and shallow, one hand pressed against her ribs around the shaft. She watched him coming with wide, wet eyes and said nothing. He said nothing, either. What was there to say? He took his knife and slit her bloody shirt, from the arrow down to the hem, peeled it away from her until he could see the shaft. It was stuck between two ribs on the right-hand side, just under her tit. Not a good place to get shot if there was such a thing. "Is it all right?" she mumbled, teeth rattling. Her face was white as snow, eyes feverish bright. "Is it all right?" "It's all right," he said, rubbing the dirt off her wet cheek with his thumb. "Don't you fret now, eh? We'll get it sorted." And all the time he was thinking, "You fucking liar, dogman. You fucking coward. She's got an arrow in her ribs." Three Trees squatted down beside them. "It'll have to come out," he said, frowning hard. "I'll hold her, you pull it." "Do what? Do what? What's he saying?" hissed Cathal, blood on her teeth. "What's—" Dogman took hold of the shaft in both hands while Three Trees took her wrists. "What are you?" Dogman pulled, and it wouldn't come. He pulled, and blood ran out from the wound round the shaft and slid down her pale side in two dark lines. He pulled, and her body thrashed and her legs kicked, and she screamed like he was killing her. He pulled, and it wouldn't come, and it wouldn't even shift a finger's breadth. "Pull it," hissed Three Trees. "It won't fucking come," snarled the dogman in his face. All right. Dogman let go the arrow and Cathal coughed and gurgled, shuddering and shaking, gasping in air and dribbling out pink spit. Three Trees rubbed at his jaw, leaving a bloody smear across his face. "If you can't pull it out, you'll have to push it on through." "What? What's he saying?" gurgled Cathal, her teeth chattering. Dogman swallowed. "We got to push it through." "No," she muttered, eyes going wide. "Just hold on, girl," muttered Three Trees in common, gripping hold of her arms again. "Just hold on now. Do it, Dogman." "No." Dogman gritted his teeth and shoved down hard on the broken shaft. Cathal jerked and made a kind of sigh. Then her eyes rolled back, passed out clean. Dogman half rolled her, body limp as a rag, saw the arrowhead sticking out her back. "All right," he muttered. "All right, it's through." He took hold of it just below the blade, twisted it gently as he slid it out. A splatter of blood came with it, but not too much. "That's good," said Three Trees. "Don't reckon it got a lung then." Dogman chewed at his lip. "That's good." He grabbed up a roll of bandage, put it against the leaking hole in her back, started winding it round her chest, Three Trees lifting her up while he passed it underneath her. That's good," he said it over and over, winding the bandage round, fumbling fast as he could with cold fingers until it was done up tight, as good as he knew how. His hands were bloody. The bandage was bloody. Her stomach and her back were covered in his pink finger marks, in streaks of dark dirt and dark blood. He pulled her shirt back down over her, rolled her gently onto her back. He touched her face warm, eyes closed, her chest moving softly, her breath smoking round her mouth. "Need to get a blanket." He started up, fumbled through his pack, pulled out his blanket, scattering gear around the fire. He dragged it back, shook it out and laid it over her. "Keep you warm, eh? Nice and warm." He pushed it in around her. "Keep the cold out." He tugged it down over her feet. "Keep warm." Dogman. Three Trees was bending over, listening to her breath. He straightened up and slowly shook his head. "She's dead." "What?" White specks drifted down round them. It was starting to snow again. "Where the hell is Polder?" snarled Marshal Burr, staring down the valley, his fists clenching and unclenching with frustration. The snow was thickening now, coming down softly in swirls and eddies, letting fall a grey curtain across the battlefield, lending to everything an air of unreality. The sounds came up as though from impossibly far away, muffled and echoing. Messengers rode back and forth behind the lines, black dots moving swiftly over the white ground with urgent calls for reinforcement. The wounded were building up, dragged groaning in stretchers, gasping in carts, or trudging, silent and bloody, down the road below the headquarters. Even through the snow it was clear that Croix's men were hard-pressed. The carefully drawn lines now bulged alarmingly in the center. Units dissolved into a single straining mass, merged with one another in the chaos and confusion of combat. West had lost track of the number of staff officers General Croix had sent to the command post, demanding support or permission to withdraw, all of them sent back with the same message: to hold and to wait. From Polder, meanwhile, came nothing but an ominous and unexpected silence. "Where the hell is he?" Burr stomped back to his tent, leaving dark footprints in the fresh crust of white. "You!" he shouted at an adjutant, beckoning him impatiently. West followed at a respectful distance and pushed through the tent flap after him. Jalenhorm just behind. Marshal Burr leaned over his table and snatched a pen from an ink bottle, spattering black drops on the wood. "Get up into those woods and find General Polder. Establish what the hell he is doing and return to me at once." "Yes, sir," squawked the officer, standing to vibrating attention. Burr's pen scrolled orders across the paper. "Inform him that he is commanded to begin his attack immediately." He signed his name with an angry slash of the wrist and jerked the paper out to the adjutant. "Of course, sir." The young officer strode purposefully from the tent. Burr turned back to his maps, wincing as he glared down, one hand tugging on his beard, the other pressed to his belly. "Where the hell is Polder?" "Perhaps, sir, he has himself come under attack." Burr burped and grimaced, burped again, and thumped the table, making the ink bottle rattle. "Curse this fucking indigestion." His thick finger stabbed at the map. "If Polder doesn't arrive soon, we'll have to commit the reserve. West, you hear me? Commit the cavalry." "Yes, sir, of course. This cannot be allowed to fail." "Yes, sir, of course. This cannot be allowed to fail." The marshal frowned, swallowed. It seemed to West he had gone suddenly very pale. "This cannot. He swayed slightly, blinking. "Sir, are you boah?" And Marshal Burr jerked forwards and sprayed black vomit over the tabletop. It splattered against the maps and turned the paper angry red. West stood frozen, his jaw gradually dropping open. Burr gurgled, fists clenched on the table in front of him, his body shaking. Then he hunched over and poured out puke again. "Gura!" And he lurched away, red drool dangling from his lip. Eyes starting from his white face, gave a strangled groan and toppled back, dragging one bloody chart with him. West finally understood what was happening just in time to dive forwards and catch the Lord Marshal's limp body before he fell. He staggered across the tent, struggling to hold him up. "Shit!" gasped Jalenhorm. "Help me, damn it!" snarled West. The big man started over and took Burr's other arm, and together they half lifted, half dragged him to his bed. West undid the marshal's top button, loosened his collar. "Some sickness of the stomach," he muttered through clenched teeth. "He's been complaining for weeks. I'll get the surgeon," squealed Jalenhorm. He started up, but West caught hold of his arm. "No." The big man stared back. "What?" "If it becomes known that he's ill, there'll be panic. Polder and Croix will do as they please. The army might fall apart. No one can know until after the battle." But West got up and put his hand on Jalenhorm's shoulder, looking him straight in the eye. He knew already what had to be done. He would not be a spectator at another disaster. "Listen to me. We must follow through with the plan. We must." "Who must?" Jalenhorm stared wildly round the tent. "Me and you alone, if that's what it takes. But this is a man's life. This is thousands of men's lives," hissed West. "It cannot be allowed to fail. You heard him say it." Jalenhorm had turned almost as pale as Burr. "I hardly think he meant that. Don't forget you owe me." West leaned still closer. "Without me you'd be one in a pile of corpses rotting nicely north of the Cumnor." He didn't like doing it, but it had to be done, and there was no time for niceties. "Do we understand each other, Captain?" Jalenhorm swallowed. "Yes, sir, I think so." "Good. You watch Marshal Burr. I'll take care of things outside." West got up and made for the tent flap. What if he improvise? He snapped over his shoulder. There were bigger things to worry about now than any one man. He ducked out into the cold air. At least a score of officers and guards were scattered around the command post before the tent, pointing down into the white valley, peering through eyeglasses and muttering to one another. "Sergeant Pike!" West beckoned to the convict and he strode over through the falling snow. "I need you to stand guard here. Do you understand?" "Of course, sir. I need you to stand guard here and admit no one but me or Captain Jalenhorn." "No one?" He dropped his voice lower. "Under any circumstances." Pike nodded, his eyes glittering in the pink mass of his face. "I understand." And he moved to the tent flap and stood beside it, almost carelessly, his thumbs tucked into his sword belt. A moment later a horse plunged down the slope and into the headquarters, smoke snorting from its nostrils. Its rider slid down from his saddle, stumbled a couple of steps before West managed to get in his way. "An urgent message for Marshal Burr from General Polder," blathered the man in a rush. He tried to take a stride towards the tent, but West did not move. "Marshal Burr is busy. You can deliver your message to me. I was explicitly told to." "To me, Captain," the man blinked. "General Polder's division is engaged, sir. In the woods. Engaged. Hotly engaged. There have been several savage attacks on the left wing, and we're hard-pressed to hold our own. General Polder requests permission to withdraw and regroup, sir. We're all out of position." West swallowed. The plan was already coming unraveled, and in imminent danger of falling apart completely. "Withdraw? No. Impossible. If he pulls back, Croix's division will be left exposed. Tell General Polder to hold his ground, and to go through with the attack if he possibly can. Tell him he must not withdraw under any circumstances. Every man must do his part." "But, sir, I should—" "Go!" shouted West. "At once!" The man saluted and clambered back onto his horse. Even as he was spurring up the slope, another visitor was pulling up his mount, not far from the tent. West cursed under his breath. It was Colonel Felnig, Croix's chief of staff. He would not be so easily put off. "Colonel West," he snapped as he swung down from the saddle. "Our division is fiercely engaged all across the line, and now cavalry has appeared on our right wing. A charge by cavalry against a regiment of levies." He was already making for the tent, pulling off his gloves. "Where the hell is Polder?" West attempted unsuccessfully to slow Felnig down. "General Polder has come under attack himself. However, I will order the reserves released immediately and—" "Not good enough," growled Felnig, brushing past him and striding towards the tent flap. "I must speak to Marshal Burr." Pike stepped out in front of him, one hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "The Marshal is busy," he whispered. His eyes bulged from his burned face in a manner so horribly threatening that even West felt slightly unnerved. There was a tense silence for a moment, as the staff officer and the faceless convict stared at one another. Then Felnig took a hesitant step back. He blinked, licked his lips nervously. "Busy. I see. Well," he took another step away. "The reserves will be committed, you say?" "Immediately." Well then, I will tell General Croix to expect reinforcements." Felnig shoved one toe into his stirrup. "This is highly irregular, though." He frowned down at the tent, at Pike, at West. "Highly irregular." And he gave his horse the spurs and charged back down into the valley. West watched him go, thinking that Felnig had no idea just how irregular. He turned to an adjutant. "Marshal Burr has ordered the reserve into action on the right wing. They must charge Bethod's cavalry and drive them off. If that flank weakens, it will mean disaster. Do you understand?" "I should have written orders from the Marshal. There is no time for written orders," roared West. "Get down there and do your duty, man." The adjutant hurried obediently away down the slope towards the 2 regiments of reserves, waiting patiently in the snow. West watched him go, his fingers working nervously. The men began to mount up, began to trot into position for a charge. West was chewing at his lip as he turned around. The officers and guards of Burr's staff were all looking at him with expressions ranging from mildly curious to downright suspicious. He nodded to a couple of them as he walked back, trying to give the impression that everything was routine. He wondered how long it would be before someone refused to simply take his word, before someone forced their way into the tent, before someone discovered that Lord Marshal Burr was halfway to the land of the dead, and had been for some time. He wondered if it would happen before the lines broke in the valley, and the command post was overrun by Northmen. If it was after, he supposed it would hardly matter. Pike was looking over at him with an expression that might have been something like a grin. West would have liked to grin back, but he didn't have it in him. The dogman sat and breathed. His back was to the fallen tree. His bow was hanging loose in his fist. A sword was stuck into the wet earth beside him. He'd taken it from a dead carl and put it to use, and he reckoned he'd have more use for it before the day was out. There was blood on Hyman, his hands, on his clothes, all over. Cathal's, Flathead's, his own. Wiping it off hardly seemed worth the effort. There'd be plenty more soon enough. 3 times the Shanka had come up the hill now, and 3 times they'd fought them off, each fight harder than the one before. Dogman wondered if they'd fight them off when they came again. He never doubted that they were coming. Not for a minute. When and how many were the questions that bothered him. Through the trees he could hear the Union wounded screeching and squealing. Lots of wounded. One of the carls had lost his hand the last time they came. Lost was the wrong word, maybe, since it got cut off with an axe. He'd been screaming loud just after, but now he was quiet, breathing soft and wheezy. They'd strapped the stump up with a rag and a belt, and now he was staring at it, with that look the wounded get sometimes. White and big-eyed, looking at his hacked-off wrist as if he couldn't understand what he was seeing, as if it was a constant surprise to him. Dogman eased himself up slow, peering over the top of the fallen tree trunk. He could see the Flatheads down in the woods, sat there, in the shadows, waiting. He didn't like seeing them lurking down there. Shanka come at you until they're finished, or they run. What are they waiting for? He hissed. When did bloody Flatheads learn to wait? When did bloody Flathead to... When did they learn to fight for Bethod? Growled Tull, wiping his sword clean. There's a lot that's changing, and none of it for the better. When did anything change for the better? Snarled Dow from further down the line. Dogman frowned. There was a new smell in his nose, like damp. There was something pale down in the trees, getting paler while he watched. What is that? That mist. Mist? Up here. Dow chuckled harsh as a crow calling. This time of day. Hold on, though they could all see it now, a trace of white, clinging to the wet slope. Dogman swallowed. His mouth was dry. He was feeling uneasy, all of a sudden, and not just from the Shanka waiting down there. Something else. The mist was creeping up through the trees, curling round the trunks, rising while they watched. The Flatheads were starting to move, dim shapes shifting in the gray murk. Don't like this, he heard Dow saying. This ain't natural. Steady, lads. 3 trees deep voice. Steady now. Dogman took heart from that. But his heart didn't last long. He rocked back and forth, feeling sick. No, whispered Shivers, his eyes sliding around like he was looking for a way out. Dogman could feel the hairs on his own arms rising, his skin prickling, his throat closing up tight. A nameless sort of a fear was taking him, flowing up the hillside along with the mist creeping through the forest, swirling round the trees, sliding under the trunk they were using as cover. It's him, whispered Shivers, his eyes open wide as a pair of butt-ops, squashing himself down like he was scared of being heard. It's him! Who? Croaked Dogman. Shivers just shook his head and pressed himself to the cold earth. The Dogman felt a powerful need to do the same, but he forced himself to rise up, forced himself to take a look over the tree. A named man, scared as a child in the dark and not knowing why? Better to face it, he thought. Big mistake. There was a shadow in the mist, too tall and too straight for a Shanka. A great huge man, big as Tull, bigger even. A giant. Dogman rubbed his sore eyes, thinking it must be some trick of the light in all that gloom, but it wasn't. He came on closer, this shadow, and he took on more shape, and more. And the clearer he got, the worse grew the fear. He'd been long and far, the Dogman all over the north, but he'd never seen so strange and unnatural a thing as this giant. One half of him was covered in great plates of black armor studded and bolted, beaten and pointed, spiked and hammered and twisted metal. The other half was mostly bare, apart from the straps and belts and buckles that held the armor on. Bare foot, bare arm, bare chest, all bulging out with ugly slabs and cords of muscle. A mask was on his face, a mask of scarred black iron. He came on closer, and he rose from the mist, and the Dogman saw the giant's skin was painted, marked blue with tiny letters, scrawled across with writing, every inch of him. No weapon, but he was no less terrible for that. He was more, if anything. He scorned to carry one, even on a battlefield. "By the fucking dead," breathed the dogman, and his mouth hung wide with horror. "Steady, lads," growled Three Trees. "Steady!" The old boy's voice was the only thing stopping the dogmen from running for it, and never coming back. "It's him," squealed one of the Carls, voice shrill as a girl's. "It's the feared!" "Shut your fucking hole," came Shiver's voice. "We know what it is." "Arrows!" shouted Three Trees. Dogman's hands were trembling as he took an aim on the giant. It was hard, somehow, to do it, even from this distance. He had to make his hand let go the string, and then the arrow pinged off the armor and away into the trees. Harmless. Grim's shot was better. His shaft sank clean into the giant's side, buried deep in his painted flesh. He seemed not even to notice. More arrows shot over from the Carl's bows. One hit him in the shoulder. Another stuck right through his huge calf. The giant made not a sound. He came on, steady as the grass growing, and the mist and the flatheads and the fear came with him. "Fuck," muttered Grim. "It's a devil!" One of the Carls screeched. "A devil from hell." Dogman was starting to think the same thing. He felt the fear growing up all round him, felt the men starting to waver. He felt himself edging backwards, almost without thinking about it. "All right now," bellowed Three Trees, voice deep and steady as if he felt no fear at all. "On the count of three. On the count of three, we charge." Dogman stared over as if the old boy had lost his reason. At least they had a tree to hide behind up here. He heard a couple of the Carls muttering, no doubt thinking much the same. They didn't much like the sound of this for a plan, charging down a hill into a great crowd of Shenka, some unnatural giant at the heart of 'em. "You sure about this?" Dogman hissed. Three Trees didn't even look at him. "Best thing for a man to do when he's afeared is charge. Get the blood up and turn the fear to fury. The ground's on our side, and we ain't waiting here for 'em. You sure?" "We're going," said Three Trees, turning away. "We're going," growled Dow, glaring round at the Carls, daring them to back down. "On three," rumbled the Thunderhead. Said Grim. Dogman swallowed, still not sure whether he'd be going or not. Three Trees peered over the trunk, his mouth a hard, flat line, watching the figures in the mist, and the great big one in the midst of his hand down flat behind him to say wait, waiting for the right distance, waiting for the right time. "Do I go on three?" whispered Shivers. "Or after three?" Dogman shook his head. "Don't hardly matter as long as you go." But his feet felt like they were two great stones. One already. Dogman looked over his shoulder, saw Cathal's body lying stretched out under his blanket near the dead fire. Should have made him feel angry, maybe, but it only made him feel more scared. Fact was, he'd no wish to end up like her. He swallowed and turned away, clutched tight to the handle of his knife, to the grip of the sword he'd borrowed off the dead. Iron felt no fear. Good weapons, ready to do bloody work. He wished he was halfway as ready himself. But he'd done this before, and he knew no one was ever really ready. You don't have to be ready. You just have to go. "Two, almost time." He felt his eyes opening wide, his nose sucking in cold air, his skin tingling cold. He smelled men and sharp pine trees, shunka and damp mist. He heard quick breath behind, slow footsteps down below, shouts from along the line, his own blood thumping in his veins. He saw every bit of everything, all going slow as dripping honey. Men moved around him, hard men with hard faces, shifting their weight, pushing forward against the fear and the mist, making ready. They were going to go, had no doubt left of it. They were all going to go. He felt the muscles in his legs begin to squeeze, pushing him up. Three Trees was first over the trunk, and the dogman was just behind, men all round him charging, and the air full of their shouts and their fury and their fear. And he was running and screaming, feet pounding and shaking his bones, breath and wind, rushing, black trees and white sky crashing and wobbling, mist flying up at him and dark shapes inside the mist. Waiting, he swung his sword at one, as he roared past, and the blade chopped deep into it, and threw it back, turned the dogman half round, and he went along, spinning, falling, shouting. The blade hacked deep into Ashanka's leg and snatched it off its feet, and Dogman spilled down the slope, slithering around in the slush, trying to right himself. The sounds of fighting were all round, muffled and strange, men bellowing curses, and Shanka snarling, and the rattles and thuds of iron on iron and iron in flesh. He spun about, sliding between the trees, not knowing where the next flathead might come from, not knowing whether he might get a spear in his back any minute. He saw a shape in the murk and sprang forward at it, shouting as hard as he could. The mist seemed to lift away in front of him, and he slithered to a horrified stop, the sound rattling out in his throat, nearly falling over backwards in his hurry to get away. The Feared was no more than 5 strides from him, bigger and more terrible than ever, broken arrows sticking from his tattooed flesh all over. Didn't help that he had a carl round the neck, out at arm's length, kicking and struggling. The painted sinews in his forearm twisted and squirmed, and the huge fingers tightened, and the carl's eyes bulged, and his mouth opened, and no sound came out. There was a crunch, and the giant tossed the corpse away like a rag, and it turned over and over in the snow and the mud, head flopping about, and lay still. The Feared stood, mist flowing round him, looking down at the Dogman from behind his black mask. And the Dogman looked back, halfway to pissing himself. But some things have to be done. Better to do 'em than to live with the fear of 'em. That's what Lodgen would have said. So the Dogman opened his mouth and screamed as loud as he could, and he charged, swinging the borrowed sword over his head. The giant lifted his great iron-plated arm and caught the blade. Metal clanged on metal and rattled the Dogman's teeth, tore the sword away and sent it spinning, but he stabbed with his knife at the same moment and slipped it under the giant's arm, ramming it right to the hilt in his tattooed side. "Ha!" shouted the Dogman, but he didn't get long to celebrate. The Feared's huge arm flashed through the mist, caught him a backhand across the chest, and flung him gurgling through the air. The woods reeled, and a tree came out of nowhere, crashed into his back and sent him sprawling in the mud. He tried to get a breath, and couldn't. Tried to roll over and couldn't. Pain crushed his ribs, like a great rock pressing on his chest. He looked up, hands clutching at the mud, hardly enough breath in him even to groan. The Feared was walking to him, no rush. He reached down and pulled the knife out of his side. It looked like a toy between his huge finger and thumb, like a toothpick. He flicked it away into the trees, a long drip of blood going with it. He lifted his great armored foot, ready to stomp down on the Dogman's head and crush his skull like a nut on an anvil. And Dogman could only lie there, helpless with pain and fear as the great shadow fell across his face. "You bastard!" And 3 trees came flying out of the trees, crashed into the giant's armored hip with his shield, and knocked him sideways, the huge metal boot squelching into the dirt just beside the Dogman's face and spattering him with mud. The old boy pressed in, hacking away at the Feared's bare side while he was off balance, snarling and cursing at him, while the Dogman gasped and squirmed, trying to get up and only making it as far as sitting, back to the tree. The giant threw his armored fist hard enough to bring a house down, but 3 trees got round it and turned it off his shield, brought his sword up and over and knocked a fearsome dent in the Feared's mask, snapping his great head back and making him stagger, blood splattering from the mouth hole. The old boy pressed in quick and slashed hard across the plates on the giant's chest, blades striking sparks from the black iron and carving a great gash into the bare blue flesh beside it. A killing blow, no doubt, but only a few specks of blood flew off the swinging blade, and it left no wound at all. The giant found his balance now, and he gave a great bellow that left Dogman trembling with fear. He set his huge foot behind him, lifted his massive arm and hurled it forward. It crashed into 3 trees' shield and ripped a chunk out of the edge, split the timbers, and went on through, thudded into the old boy's shoulder, and flung him groaning onto his back. The Feared pressed in on top of him, lifting his big blue fist up high. 3 trees snarled and stabbed his sword clean through his tattooed thigh right to the hilt. Dogman saw the point slide bloody out the back of his leg, but it didn't even slow him. That great hand dropped down and crunched into 3 trees' ribs with a sound like dry sticks breaking. Dogman groaned, clawing at the dirt, but his chest was on fire and he couldn't get up, and he couldn't do anything but watch. The Feared lifted up his other fist now, covered in black iron. He lifted it up slow and careful, weighted up high, then brought it whistling down, smashed it into Three Trees' other side and crushed him sighing into the dirt. The great arm went up again, red blood on blue knuckles, and a black line came out of the mist and stabbed into the Feared's armpit, shoving him over sideways. Shivers, with a spear, jabbing at the giant and shouting, pushing him across the slope. The Feared rolled and slithered up, faked a step back and flicked out his hand quick as a massive snake, slapped Shivers away like a man might swat a fly, squawking and kicking into the mist. Before the giant could follow him, there was a roar like thunder and Tull's sword crashed into his armored shoulder and flung him down on one knee. Now Dow came out of the mist, slashed a great chunk out of his leg from behind. Shivers was up again, snarling and jabbing with his spear, and the three of them seemed to have the giant penned in. He should have been dead, however big he was. The wounds Three Trees and Shivers and Dow had given him, he should have been mud. Instead he rose up again. 6 arrows and Three Trees' sword stuck through his flesh, and he let go a roar from behind his iron mask that made Dogman tremble to his toes. Shivers fell back on his arse, going white as milk. Tool blinked and faltered and let his sword drop. Even Black Dow took a step away. The Feared reached down and took hold of the hilt of Three Trees' sword. He slid it out from his leg and let it drop bloody in the dirt at his feet. It left no wound behind. No wound at all. Then he turned and sprang away into the gloom, and the mist closed in behind him. And the Dogman heard the sounds of him crashing away through the trees, and he was never so glad to see the back of anything. "Come here," Dow screamed, making ready to tear down the slope after him. But Tull got in his way with one big hand held up. "You're going nowhere. We don't know how many Shanka there are down there. We can kill that thing another day." "Out of my way, big lad." "No." Dogman rolled forward, wincing all the way at the pain in his chest, started clawing his way up the slope. The mist was already spilling back, leaving the cold, clear air behind. Grim was coming down the other way, bowstring drawn back with an arrow knocked. There were a lot of corpses in the mud and the snow. Shanka mostly, and a couple of Carls. Seemed to take the Dogman an age to drag himself up to Three Trees. The old boy was lying on his back in the mud, one arm lying still with his broken shield strapped to it. Air was snorting in shallow through his nose, bubbling back out bloody from his mouth. His eyes rolled down to Dogman as he crawled up next to him, and he reached out and grabbed a hold of his shirt, pulled him down, hissing in his ear through clenched tight, bloody teeth. "Listen to me, Dogman. Listen." "What, Chief?" croaked Dogman, hardly able to talk for the pain in his chest. He waited, and he listened, and nothing came. Three Trees' eyes were wide open, staring up at the branches. A drop of water splattered on his cheek, ran down into his bloody beard. "Nothing else?" "Back to the mud," said Grim, face hanging slack as old cobwebs. West chewed at his fingernails as he watched General Croy and his staff riding up the road, a group of dark-dressed men on dark horses, solemn as a procession of undertakers. The snow had stopped for now, but the sky was angry black, the light so bad it felt like evening, and an icy wind was blowing through the command post, making the fabric of the tent snap and rustle. West's borrowed time was almost done. He felt a sudden impulse, almost overpowering, to turn and run, an impulse so ludicrous that he immediately had another, equally inappropriate, to burst out laughing. Luckily, he was able to stop himself from doing either. Lucky to stop himself laughing, at least. This was far from a laughing matter. As the clattering hooves came closer, he was left wondering whether the idea of running was such a foolish one after all. Croy pulled his black charger up savagely and climbed down, jerked his uniform smooth, adjusted his sword belt, turned sharply and came on towards the tent. West intercepted him, hoping to get the first word in and buy a few more moments. "General Croy, well done, sir. Your division fought with great tenacity." "Of course they did, Colonel West." Croy sneered the name as though he were delivering a mortal insult, his staff gathering into a menacing half-circle behind him. "And might I ask our situation?" "Our situation," snarled the general. "Our situation is that the Northmen are driven off, but not routed. We gave them a mauling in the end, but my units were fought out, every man, too weary to pursue. The enemy have been able to withdraw across the fords thanks to Polder's cowardice. I mean to see him cashiered in disgrace. I mean to see him hanged for treason. I will see it done on my honor." He glowered around the headquarters, while his men muttered angrily amongst themselves. "Where is Lord Marshal Burr? I demand to see the Lord Marshal. Of course, if you could just give me West's." Words were smothered by the mounting noise of more rushing hooves, and a second group of riders careered around the side of the marshal's tent. Who else but General Polder, accompanied by his own enormous staff? A cart pulled into the headquarters along with them, crowding the narrow space with beasts and men. Polder vaulted down from his saddle and hastened through the dirt. His hair was in disarray. His jaw was locked tight. There was a long scratch down his cheek. His crimson entourage followed behind him, steels rattling, gold braid flapping, faces flushed. "Polder," hissed Croy, "you've some nerve showing your face in front of me." "Some nerve? The only damn nerve you've shown all day. How dare you?" screeched Polder. "I demand an apology." "Apologize at once? Apologize? Me apologize? Ha! You'll be the one saying sorry, I'll see to it. The plan was for you to come in from the left wing. We were hard-pressed for more than 2 hours. Almost 3 hours, sir," chipped in one of Croy's staff unhelpfully. 3 hours, damn it! If that is not cowardice, I fumble for the definition. "Cowardice!" shrieked Polder. A couple of his staff went as far as to place their hands on their steels. "You'll apologize to me immediately. My division came under a brutal and sustained attack upon our flank. I was obliged to lead a charge myself, on foot," and he thrust forward his cheek and indicated the scratch with one gloved finger. "It was we who did all the fighting. We who won the victory here today. Damn you, Polder, you did nothing. The victory belongs to my men alone. An attack. An attack from what? From animals of the forest. Aha! Exactly so. Show 'em." One of Polder's staff ripped back the oilskin on the cart, displaying what seemed at first to be a heap of bloody rags. He wrinkled up his nose and shoved it forward. The thing flopped off onto the ground, rolled onto its back and stared up at the sky with beetling black eyes. A huge, misshapen jaw hung open, long, sharp teeth sticking every which way. Its skin was a grayish-brown color, rough and calloused. Its nose was an ill-formed stub. Its skull was flattened and hairless, with a heavy ridge of brow and a small, receding forehead. One of its arms was short and muscular, the other much longer and slightly bent, both ending in claw-like hands. The whole creature seemed lumpen, twisted, primitive. West gawped down at it, open-mouthed. Plainly, it was not human. "There! Squealed Polder in triumph. "Now tell us my division didn't fight. There were hundreds of these creatures out there. Thousands, and they fight like mad things. We only just managed to hold our ground, and it's damn lucky for you that we did. I demand," he frothed. "I demand," he ranted. "I demand," he shrieked, face turning purple. "An apology!" Croy's eyes twitched with incomprehension, with anger, with frustration. His lips twisted, his jaw worked. His fists clenched. Clearly there was no entry in the rule book for a situation such as this. He rounded on West. "I demand to see Marshal Burr," he snarled. "As do I," screeched Polder shrilly, not to be outdone. "The Lord Marshal is." West's lips moved silently. He had no ideas left. No strategies, no ruses, no schemes. He is. There would be no retreat across the fords for him. He was finished. More than likely he would end up in a penal colony himself. He is. I am here. And to West's profound amazement, Burr was standing in the entrance to his tent. Even in the half-light, it seemed obvious that he was terribly ill. His face was ashen pale, and there was a sheen of sweat across his forehead. His eyes were sunken and ringed with black. His lip quivered. His legs were unsteady. He clutched at the tent pole beside him for support. West could see a dark stain down the front of his uniform that looked very much like blood. "I am afraid I have been somewhat unwell during the battle," he croaked. "Something I ate, perhaps." His hand trembled on the pole and Jalenhorm lurked near his shoulder, ready to catch him if he fell. West glanced nervously at the angry gathering, wondering what they might make of this walking corpse. but the two generals were far too caught up in their own feud to pay any attention to that. "Lord Marshal, I must protest about General Polder, sir. I demand that General Croy apologize. The best form of defense seemed to West to be an immediate attack. It would be traditional," he cut in at the top of his voice, "for us first to congratulate our commanding officer on his victory." He began to clap, slowly and deliberately. Pike and Jalenhorn joined him without delay. Polder and Croy exchanged an icy glance, then they too raised their hands. "May I be the very first to congratulate you, Lord Marshal." Their staffs joined in, and others around the tent, and then more further away, and soon a rousing cheer was going up. "A cheer for Lord Marshal Burr." The Lord Marshal. Victory. Burr himself twitched and quivered. One hand clutched to his stomach, his face a mask of anguish. West slunk backwards, away from the attention, away from the glory. He had not the slightest interest in it. That had been close, he knew, impossibly close. His hands were trembling. His mouth tasted sour. His vision was swimming. He could still hear Polder and Croy, already arguing again, like a pair of furious ducks quacking. "We must move on Dunbreck immediately. A swift assault while they are unwary and— foolishness! The defenses are too strong. We must surround the walls and prepare for a lengthy nonsense. My division could carry the place tomorrow. Rubbish! We must dig in. Siegcraft is my particular area of expertise." And on and on. West rubbed his fingertips in his ears, trying to block out the voices as he stumbled through the churned-up mud. A few paces further on, and he clambered around a rocky outcrop, pressed his back to it, and slowly slid down. Slid down until he was sitting hunched in the snow, hugging his knees, the way he used to do when he was a child, and his father was angry. Down in the valley, in the gathering gloom, he could see men moving over the battlefield, already starting to dig the graves. That's it for today's video. The next part arrives tomorrow. Subscribe so you don't miss it.